Welcome, true believers, to a journey through the web of time itself. Tonight, we're going to explore the complete story of Spider-Man, from a young boy's fateful encounter with a radioactive spider in 1962, all the way through decades of heroism, heartbreak, and hope. This is a story that spans lifetimes, filled with villains and victories, love and loss, the constant struggle between power and responsibility in a world that needs heroes more than it knows. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind swing through the streets of New York alongside our friendly neighborhood wall crawler. We'll move gently through each era, each relationship, each moment that shaped the hero we know and love. There's no rush here, no need to remember every villain's name or every plot twist. Just let the story carry you like Spider-Man's web line through the city night. Our story begins in a simpler time, when the biggest worry for most teenagers was passing their next exam or working up the courage to ask someone to the school dance. The year is 1962, and America is full of optimism and scientific wonder. The atomic age has brought promises of clean energy and miracle medicines, while the space race has everyone looking up at the stars with hope and excitement. In the borough of Queens, New York, where tree-lined streets stretch between modest homes and local diners serve as community gathering places, lives a 15-year-old boy who has no idea that his life is about to change forever. Peter Benjamin Parker is by all accounts an unremarkable teenager, too smart for his own good, too awkward for the popular crowd, and too kind-hearted for the cruel realities of high school social hierarchies. Peter lives with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben in a small house on Ingram Street, a place filled with warmth and love despite the modest circumstances. His parents, Richard and Mary Parker, died when he was very young, leaving him in the care of his father's brother and his wife. Ben and May Parker are simple people. He works various jobs to make ends meet. She tends to the house and worries about everyone in the neighborhood, but they possess the kind of moral strength that builds character in the children they raise. The house itself tells the story of a family that has learned to find joy in small things. There are photos on every surface showing Peter at various ages, always with that slightly serious expression that suggests a boy thinking deeper thoughts than most his age. May's garden in the backyard blooms with flowers that she tends with the same careful attention she gives to Peter's well-being. Ben's workshop in the basement is cluttered with half-finished projects and repair jobs for neighbors who can't afford professional help. Peter's room is a teenager's sanctuary, filled with science textbooks, chemistry sets, and magazines about space exploration and atomic energy. His desk is always covered with homework, but also with sketches and notes about scientific experiments he wants to try. The walls are decorated with pictures of scientists and inventors: Einstein, Edison, Pasteur, men who used their intelligence to make the world a better place. GP Wonderful D. Circle B. At Midtown High School, Peter exists in that invisible space occupied by students who are too smart to be ignored by teachers, but too socially awkward to be noticed by their peers. He excels in every class, particularly science, where his natural curiosity and analytical mind set him apart from other students. But this academic success comes at a social cost. His classmates see him as the class brain, someone to copy homework from but not someone to invite to parties or include in after-school activities. Flash Thompson embodies everything that Peter is not: tall, athletic, confident, and surrounded by friends who laugh at his jokes and follow his lead. Flash has made Peter his favorite target for bullying, not out of any particular malice, but because Peter represents an easy mark, someone who won't fight back, and whose suffering can provide entertainment for Flash's audience. The cruel irony is that Flash genuinely admires Spider-Man, the hero that Peter will become, never knowing that he's tormenting his own idol. Betty Brandt works as a secretary at the Daily Bugle, the newspaper that will play such an important role in Peter's future. She's a few years older than Peter, possessing a maturity and grace that comes from having to take care of herself and her family from a young age. Betty represents Peter's first real romantic interest, someone who sees past his awkward exterior to the good heart beneath. But our story truly begins on a Tuesday afternoon in November, when Peter's science class takes a field trip to a demonstration of radioactive research at a local university. The students file into the lecture hall with the typical enthusiasm of teenagers forced to attend an educational event, most of them more interested in sitting next to their friends than in learning about atomic science. The demonstration is being conducted by Dr. Curtis Connors, a brilliant scientist who will play a significant role in Peter's future, though neither of them knows it yet. Dr. Connors explains the peaceful applications of atomic energy, how controlled radiation can be used to treat diseases and create new materials. Behind him, various experiments showcase the power of radioactive isotopes, plants growing faster under controlled exposure, metals taking on new properties, and most significantly for our story, a small spider that has been exposed to radioactive rays. The spider, no larger than a pencil eraser, sits in its small glass enclosure, seemingly no different from any other spider except for the slight luminescence that emanates from its body. The radioactive exposure has changed it at a cellular level, altering its DNA in ways that the scientists don't fully understand. It was supposed to be a simple demonstration of how radiation affects living tissue, but the universe has other plans. As Dr. Connors continues his lecture, explaining the careful safety protocols that prevent dangerous exposure, the radioactive spider begins to lower itself on an invisible thread. It was supposed to be a simple demonstration of how radiation affects living tissue, but the universe has other plans. The enclosure, not properly secured, allows the tiny creature to escape unnoticed. It descends silently through the air, drawn perhaps by some instinct or random chance toward the group of students. Peter, sitting in the middle of the classroom, is only half listening to the lecture. His mind wanders as it often does, thinking about the homework he needs to finish and the chemistry experiment he wants to try at home. He's examining his hand, looking at the lines on his palm and wondering about the biological processes that create fingerprints, when he feels a small sharp pain on the back of his right hand. Looking down, he sees a spider, glowing faintly with an eerie light, embedded in his skin. The pain is immediate and intense, far worse than any normal spider bite should be. Peter quickly brushes the spider away, watching as it falls to the floor and curls up, apparently dying from the effort of delivering its radioactive venom. The bite site throbs with a heat that seems to spread through Peter's entire hand, then up his arm. He feels dizzy and nauseous, but doesn't want to cause a disruption during the educational presentation. The other students haven't noticed anything unusual. To them, Peter just looks like he always does, pale and slightly uncomfortable in social situations. As the demonstration continues, Peter's condition worsens, sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the lecture hall. His vision blurs intermittently, and he experiences strange sensations, as if he can somehow sense the movements of everyone around him, feel the vibrations of their heartbeats and breathing. The radioactive spider's bite is beginning the process that will transform him at a genetic level, rewriting his DNA to incorporate the proportional strength and abilities of a spider. When the class finally ends and the students begin filing out, Peter staggers to his feet, struggling to maintain his balance. Flash Thompson, ever alert for opportunities to embarrass his favorite target, notices Peter's unsteady gait and makes a comment about Parker looking sick. But for once, Flash's mockery barely registers with Peter, who is fighting to stay conscious as waves of dizziness wash over him. The walk home from school, normally a pleasant 20-minute journey through the familiar streets of Queens, becomes an ordeal. Peter has to stop several times, leaning against lampposts and mailboxes as his body struggles to cope with the radical changes taking place at a cellular level. His clothes feel different against his skin, as if his sense of touch has become dramatically more sensitive. Colors seem brighter, sounds sharper, and he finds himself noticing details in his environment that he's never paid attention to before. By the time Peter reaches the house on Ingram Street, he's barely able to climb the front steps. Aunt May takes one look at his pale, sweating face and immediately assumes he's coming down with the flu. She helps him up to his room, brings him aspirin and soup, and insists that he rest. Uncle Ben, returning from work, pokes his head into Peter's room to check on him, offering quiet words of encouragement and the promise that he'll feel better soon. That night, as Peter lies in his bed trying to sleep, the transformation accelerates. His body temperature fluctuates wildly, alternating between chills and fever. Strange dreams fill his sleep, images of webs and walls, of crawling and climbing in ways that human beings aren't supposed to move. He dreams of seeing the world from impossible angles, of sensing danger before it appears, of strength that could crush steel and agility that could defy gravity. When morning comes, Peter wakes to discover that the world has changed, or rather, that he has changed. His vision, once requiring glasses for reading, is now perfectly clear. Colors are more vivid, details sharper, and he finds that he can see clearly across his entire room without squinting. The thick glasses that have been a part of his appearance since childhood are suddenly unnecessary, a fact that both amazes and terrifies him. But the changes go far beyond improved eyesight. As Peter sits up in bed, he accidentally grabs his wooden headboard with enough force to crush it, leaving finger-shaped indentations in the solid oak. His reflexes have become incredible. When he knocks over a glass of water on his nightstand, he catches it before it hits the floor, moving faster than he ever thought possible. The most dramatic discovery comes when Peter, getting out of bed, accidentally places his palm flat against the wall and finds that he sticks to it, not just touching the wall but actually adhering to it with enough strength to support his weight. When he tries to pull away, he has to consciously think about releasing his grip, as if his hands have developed some kind of biological suction. Experimenting carefully, Peter discovers that he can stick to any surface, walls, ceilings, even glass. The ability seems to work through his clothing, though it's strongest when his skin makes direct contact with a surface. He spends the morning hours while Aunt May and Uncle Ben assume he's still sleeping off his illness, exploring these new abilities in the privacy of his bedroom. The strength is the most obvious change. Peter finds that he can easily lift his heavy wooden desk with one hand, bend metal rulers into pretzels, and perform feats that should be impossible for a teenager of his size. But with the strength comes control somehow. Instinctively, he knows exactly how much force to use for different tasks. He doesn't accidentally crush everything he touches, because some part of his transformed mind automatically regulates his grip. Then there's the sense that he comes to think of as his spider sense, an inexplicable awareness of his surroundings that alerts him to potential dangers. When May brings up his breakfast tray, he knows she's coming long before he hears her footsteps on the stairs. When a bird flies too close to his window, he's aware of its presence and trajectory. It's as if the world has become transparent to him, revealing hidden patterns and connections that normal humans can't perceive. The discovery of his abilities leaves Peter in a state of excited confusion. On one hand, he's gained powers that most people could only dream of: strength, agility, and senses far beyond human norms. On the other hand, he has no idea what to do with these abilities or how they'll affect his life. The scientific part of his mind wants to understand what's happened to him, to study and quantify these changes. The teenage part of his mind just wants to test his limits and see what he's capable of. After convincing Aunt May that he's feeling much better, Peter returns to school the following day, trying to act normal while internally marveling at his transformed perceptions. Everything seems different. He can hear conversations from across the hallway, smell the different perfumes and colognes that his classmates wear, feel the vibrations of footsteps through the floor. The experience is overwhelming at first, but gradually he learns to filter out the excess information and focus on what's important. The real test comes during lunch, when Flash Thompson decides to demonstrate his dominance by shoving Peter against a locker. In the past, Peter would have simply endured the humiliation, maybe made a sarcastic comment under his breath, and walked away. But now, as Flash's hand makes contact with his chest, Peter's spider sense screams a warning, and his enhanced reflexes take over. Without thinking, Peter catches Flash's wrist and gently, or what feels gentle to him, pushes the larger boy away. Flash stumbles backwards several feet, a look of surprise and confusion replacing his usual confident smirk. For a moment, the hallway falls silent as students process what they've just seen. Mild-mannered Peter Parker not only standing up to Flash Thompson but actually overpowering him. The incident creates ripples throughout the school's social ecosystem. Students who have never paid attention to Peter suddenly look at him with new interest. Teachers notice that the quiet boy from Queens seems more confident, more self-assured. Even Flash seems uncertain about how to respond to this new dynamic, his usual bullying tactics suddenly ineffective against someone who no longer appears to be an easy target. But Peter quickly realizes that he can't simply use his powers to solve his social problems. The strength that allowed him to push Flash away could just as easily seriously injure someone if he's not careful. The responsibility of having such abilities begins to weigh on him, even before he fully understands what that responsibility means. It's during this period of adjustment that Peter sees an advertisement that changes everything. A wrestling match offering $100 to anyone who can stay in the ring for 3 minutes with professional wrestler Joseph "Crusher" Hogan. The money would be enough to buy the microscope he's been wanting, maybe even help Uncle Ben with some of the household bills. More importantly, it would be a way to test his abilities in a controlled environment. The decision to enter the wrestling match represents Peter's first real choice about how to use his powers. He's not thinking about becoming a hero or fighting crime. He's just a teenager who wants to prove himself and earn some money. But even this simple decision sets him on the path that will define the rest of his life. The wrestling arena is a far cry from the quiet streets of Queens. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap beer, filled with the shouts of spectators eager to see some unfortunate amateur get pummeled by the professional wrestler. Peter, having snuck out of the house with a hastily assembled costume to hide his identity, waits nervously in the dressing area. His costume is nothing like the sleek outfit he'll eventually wear, just a red shirt with a spider web pattern drawn in black marker, blue pants and a crude mask that covers most of his face. He's chosen the name Spiderman almost as an afterthought, inspired by his new abilities and the need to call himself something when he signs up for the match. The crowd's reaction when the skinny teenager is introduced as Crusher Hogan's opponent is exactly what Peter expected. Laughter, jeers, and bets placed heavily against his chances of lasting even 30 seconds in the ring. Hogan himself seems almost embarrassed to be fighting someone so obviously outmatched, but the show must go on. What happens next becomes the stuff of legend. Peter doesn't just survive 3 minutes in the ring, he dominates the match, using his enhanced strength, speed, and agility to outmaneuver and overpower the much larger wrestler. He sticks to the walls of the ring, leaps impossible distances, and demonstrates strength that leaves both Hogan and the audience stunned. By the end of the 3 minutes, Crusher Hogan is flat on his back, and the crowd is on its feet cheering for the mysterious Spider-Man. The victory brings Peter more than just the prize money, it brings him attention he never expected. After the match, a television producer approaches him with an offer to appear on a variety show, promising significant payment for a brief demonstration of his abilities. For a teenager who has never had much money or recognition, the opportunity seems too good to pass up. The TV appearance goes even better than the wrestling match. Peter, still in his crude costume, performs feats that amaze the studio audience and the viewers at home. He walks up walls, lifts incredibly heavy objects, and demonstrates reflexes that seem almost supernatural. The host treats him like a celebrity, and for the first time in his life, Peter experiences what it feels like to be admired rather than mocked. As he leaves the television studio, counting the money he's earned and basking in the glow of public acclaim, Peter feels like he's discovered his calling. The shy, awkward teenager who was picked on at school has found a way to use his abilities to gain respect and financial success. He's already making plans for future appearances, thinking about how he can parlay his powers into a career that will support him and his family. But the universe has other plans for Peter Parker. Walking through the studio building toward the exit, Peter's enhanced senses alert him to commotion ahead. Around a corner, he sees a security guard shouting for someone to stop a thief who has just robbed the building's business office. The thief, a thin man in a dark jacket, runs past Peter toward the elevators, clutching a bag of stolen money. The security guard, an older man who is clearly outmatched by the younger, faster criminal, calls out to Peter for help. "Stop him," the guard shouts. "You've got those powers, you can catch him easy." For a moment, Peter considers acting. His spider sense is tracking the thief's movement, and he knows he could easily apprehend the man with his enhanced speed and agility. But then he remembers the words of the television producer, "You're going to be a star, kid. Don't waste your time on other people's problems." The decision Peter makes in that moment will haunt him for the rest of his life. He steps aside and lets the thief escape, telling the frustrated security guard that it's not his job to catch criminals. "I'm not a policeman," Peter says, echoing the attitude he's developed since gaining his powers. "I'm an entertainer. Sorry." The thief disappears into the elevator, and the security guard stares at Peter with disgust. "What's wrong with you?" the older man asks. "You could have stopped him, and you just let him go. What kind of person does that?" Peter shrugs off the criticism, telling himself that he has no obligation to risk his newfound career to help strangers. He's worked hard to develop his abilities and build his reputation. Why should he jeopardize that for people who have never done anything for him? The world has been cruel to Peter Parker. Why should Spider-Man be any kinder to the world? This philosophy of enlightened self-interest serves Peter well over the next few weeks. He makes several more television appearances, signs autographs for fans, and begins to accumulate the kind of money and recognition he's never had before. Aunt May and Uncle Ben notice that he seems happier and more confident, though they don't know the source of his transformation. But Peter's new worldview is about to be tested in the most terrible way possible. The call comes on a Thursday evening in late November. Peter is in his room, working on homework and planning his next television appearance when the phone rings downstairs. He hears Aunt May answer, her voice changing from its usual warm greeting to something tight with worry and fear. "Ben," she calls up the stairs. "Ben, you need to come down here. It's the police." Peter's spider sense doesn't warn him about what's coming. It can detect physical danger, but not the emotional devastation that's about to engulf his world. He hears Uncle Ben's heavy footsteps on the stairs, the low murmur of conversation, and then Aunt May's sharp intake of breath. Something is wrong, very wrong. Peter creeps to the top of the stairs, straining to hear the conversation. The police officer's voice is professional but sympathetic as he explains that there's been an incident at the warehouse where Ben works as a night security guard. A burglar broke in, and when Ben tried to stop him, the criminal shot him. Ben is at the hospital, but the officer's tone suggests that Peter should prepare for the worst. The drive to the hospital passes in a blur of streetlights and worry. Aunt May sits in the passenger seat, clutching her purse and whispering prayers while Peter stares out the window and tries to process what's happening. Uncle Ben, who has never hurt anyone in his life, shot by some random criminal looking for things to steal. It doesn't seem real. At the hospital, the doctor's words confirm Peter's worst fears. Uncle Ben died from his injuries before the ambulance could get him to the emergency room. The man who raised him, who taught him right from wrong, who believed in him when no one else would, is gone forever, killed by a stranger for a few dollars worth of merchandise. The grief hits Peter like a physical blow, doubling him over with its intensity. Aunt May collapses into a chair sobbing, while Peter struggles to comprehend a world without Uncle Ben's steady presence. The man who called him Tiger and helped him with his homework, who fixed things around the house and told terrible jokes at dinner, will never come home again. But grief quickly transforms into something else, anger, hot and consuming, directed at the man who pulled the trigger. Peter excuses himself from the hospital waiting room, claiming he needs some air, and changes into his Spider-Man costume in a bathroom stall. The crude outfit that once represented his path to fame and fortune now becomes something else entirely, the uniform of vengeance. Finding the killer proves surprisingly easy for someone with Peter's enhanced senses and agility. The police have cordoned off the warehouse and set up a perimeter. but they're looking for a normal human being, not someone who can climb walls and move through shadows without being detected. Peter's spider sense leads him through the building, following traces of the gunman's passage like a bloodhound on a scent trail. He finds the killer hiding in an old warehouse on the waterfront, counting the money he stole and apparently unconcerned about the life he took to get it. Peter's anger blazes as he looks at this pathetic figure, not some master criminal or desperate man driven to crime by circumstances, just a petty thief who chose to kill rather than risk being caught. The confrontation is brief and decisive. Peter's enhanced abilities make him more than a match for an ordinary criminal, and within moments he has the killer webbed up and helpless. But as he prepares to deliver the justice that the law might not provide, the killer turns toward him and Peter sees his face clearly for the first time. It's the same man he let escape from the television studio just 2 weeks earlier. The recognition hits Peter like a thunderbolt, freezing him in place as the full implications crash over him. If he had stopped this man when he had the chance, if he had listened to the security guard's plea for help instead of thinking only of himself, Uncle Ben would still be alive. The man who raised him, who loved him, who never hurt anyone, died because Peter chose to let a criminal escape rather than risk his own comfort and success. The killer, seeing Peter's shocked reaction, begins to babble about the earlier encounter, not knowing that he's talking to the same person who let him go. "I remember you," he says. "You were at that TV studio. You could have caught me, but you didn't. Said it wasn't your job." Peter's world crumbles around him as he realizes the full scope of his failure. All his life, Uncle Ben had tried to teach him about responsibility, about doing the right thing even when it's difficult or inconvenient. "With great power comes great responsibility," Ben had said, though Peter had never really understood what that meant. Now, too late, the lesson becomes devastatingly clear. The powers that Peter had seen as a gift, a ticket to fame and fortune, are revealed to be something much more significant and much more dangerous. The abilities that make him stronger and faster than normal humans don't exist for his benefit alone. They come with an obligation to use them for the good of others, to protect people who can't protect themselves. Uncle Ben's death is the direct result of Peter's failure to live up to that obligation. The man who meant everything to him died because Peter chose selfishness over service, personal gain over moral responsibility. The weight of that knowledge threatens to crush him, but it also clarifies his path forward with painful certainty. Peter leaves the killer webbed up for the police to find, along with evidence of his guilt and the stolen money. But the real justice, the real payment for Uncle Ben's death, will come not from the legal system, but from Peter's commitment to ensure that his failure never happens again. The lesson has been learned at the highest possible cost, written in blood and grief across his heart. Walking home through the quiet streets of Queens, still wearing his crude Spiderman costume, Peter makes a vow that will define the rest of his life. Never again will he use his powers solely for personal benefit. Never again will he stand aside when he has the ability to help others. The gifts that the radioactive spider gave him will be dedicated to protecting innocent people from the predators who threaten them. The teenager who entered that warehouse seeking vengeance emerges as something else entirely, a hero forged in the crucible of loss and tempered by the recognition of his own moral failure. Peter Parker may have gained his powers from a spider bite, but Spider-Man was born in the moment when Peter truly understood what Uncle Ben had been trying to teach him all along. With great power comes great responsibility. It's not just a saying or a piece of advice, it's the fundamental truth that will guide every decision Peter makes for the rest of his life. The price of learning that lesson was higher than anyone should have to pay, but Uncle Ben's death will not be meaningless if it prevents others from suffering the same fate. As Peter returns home to comfort Aunt May and begin the long process of grieving for the man who raised him, he carries with him a new understanding of his purpose. The powers he once saw as a pathway to fame and fortune are now revealed as tools for service, weapons to be used in an ongoing war against the cruelty and injustice that took Uncle Ben's life. Spider-Man is born from tragedy, but he represents hope, the hope that one person armed with power and guided by conscience can make a difference in a world that often seems dark and uncaring. The friendly neighborhood wall crawler who will become beloved by millions of readers began his career not with a triumph but with a failure so profound that it reshapes his entire understanding of heroism. Uncle Ben's final gift to his nephew is this terrible, necessary lesson that power without responsibility is not just worthless but actively dangerous. The spider's bite gave Peter abilities, but Ben's death gave him purpose. Together they created a hero who will spend his life trying to live up to the memory of a good man who died too soon, and a promise that such senseless tragedies will not go unopposed. The weeks following Uncle Ben's funeral pass like a strange dream for Peter Parker. During the day, he maintains the facade of a normal teenager, attending classes, doing homework, helping Aunt May with household tasks. But at night, he becomes something else entirely. Prowling the streets of Queens and Manhattan in his crude costume, looking for criminals to stop and wrongs to right. These early adventures are far from the polished heroics that Spider-Man will eventually become known for. Peter makes mistakes constantly, webbing innocent bystanders by accident, misjudging his strength and causing property damage, arriving too late to prevent crimes he sensed with his spider powers. The learning curve is steep and often embarrassing, but each failure teaches him something valuable about the proper use of his abilities. The costume itself becomes a source of constant frustration. The hastily assembled outfit that served well enough for wrestling matches and television appearances proves inadequate for serious crime fighting. The mask doesn't breathe properly, leaving Peter gasping for air during long pursuits. The homemade web shooters malfunction at crucial moments, leaving him stranded on rooftops or swinging through the air with unreliable equipment. But gradually, Peter begins to understand the true scope of his transformation. The radioactive spider's bite didn't just give him strength and agility, it fundamentally altered his physiology in ways that become apparent only through experience. His metabolism runs much faster than normal, requiring him to eat constantly to fuel his enhanced abilities. His healing factor allows him to recover from injuries that would sideline ordinary people for weeks. Most importantly, his spider sense develops into something approaching precognition, warning him of dangers before they become apparent to his normal senses. The psychological adjustment proves even more challenging than the physical one. Peter has spent 15 years as an invisible, overlooked teenager, and suddenly he possesses abilities that make him more powerful than grown men. The temptation to use his powers for personal satisfaction, to pay back Flash Thompson for years of bullying, to impress girls who never noticed him before, to get revenge on teachers who dismissed his intelligence is constant and seductive. But Uncle Ben's memory serves as a moral compass, guiding Peter away from the darker applications of his abilities. Every time he's tempted to use his powers selfishly, he remembers the security guard's face when he let the thief escape, remembers Aunt May's tears at the hospital, remembers the terrible moment when he realized that his selfishness had cost an innocent man his life. Peter's relationship with the Daily Bugle begins by accident, born out of financial necessity rather than any journalistic ambition. The funeral expenses and medical bills from Uncle Ben's death have strained the family's already limited resources, and Aunt May is too proud to accept charity from neighbors or social services. Peter knows he needs to find a way to contribute to the household income, but his crime-fighting activities make it difficult to maintain a regular job. The solution comes to him during one of his early Spider-Man adventures, when he stops a robbery in progress and realizes that someone with a camera could have captured dramatic photographs of the incident. Peter has always been handy with a camera. It was one of his hobbies before the spider bite, and he still owns a decent camera that Uncle Ben gave him for his birthday. The technical challenges of photographing himself in action while fighting crime prove surprisingly complex. Peter has to develop an intricate system of automatic timers, web-attached cameras, and carefully planned positions that allow him to capture dynamic shots of Spider-Man in action. The process requires him to choreograph his battles to some degree, setting up cameras before confronting criminals and making sure he's positioned properly for dramatic photos. The Daily Bugle, New York's most sensational newspaper, proves to be the perfect market for such photographs. The paper's publisher, J. Jonah Jameson, has built his career on dramatic headlines and controversial stories, and pictures of the mysterious Spider-Man represent exactly the kind of content that sells newspapers. When Peter walks into the Bugle offices with his first batch of Spider-Man photos, he's amazed by the enthusiasm of the staff. Jameson himself is a force of nature, a middle-aged man with a mustache and an ego, perpetually shouting about deadlines and circulation numbers. His initial reaction to the Spider-Man photos is purely professional. They're good pictures that will help sell papers, but something about the masked hero immediately rubs him the wrong way. Perhaps it's Spider-Man's anonymity that bothers him, or maybe it's the hero's apparent independence from official authority, but Jameson quickly develops an obsessive hatred for the wall crawler. The irony of the situation is lost on everyone except Peter himself. The same person who risks his life fighting crime as Spider-Man also profits from selling photographs of his adventures to a newspaper whose publisher considers him a menace to society. Every dramatic photo that helps Jameson sell papers also provides him with ammunition for his anti-Spider-Man editorials. Betty Brant, Jameson's secretary, represents Peter's first real romantic interest outside of his childhood fantasies. She's a few years older than Peter, possessing a sophistication and grace that comes from having real responsibilities and making her own way in the world. When Peter nervously approaches her desk to sell his first batch of photos, her kindness and professionalism immediately put him at ease. Betty treats Peter with a respect that he's not accustomed to receiving from anyone outside his family. She doesn't see him as the class brain or the awkward teenager. To her, he's a young freelance photographer with talent and determination. Their relationship develops slowly, built on shared conversations during Peter's visits to the Bugle offices, and a mutual appreciation for each other's dedication to their work. As Spider-Man's reputation grows throughout New York City, his activities begin to attract attention from criminal elements who see the masked hero as either a threat to their operations or a challenge to their supremacy. The rogues gallery that will define Spider-Man's career begins to assemble, each villain representing a different aspect of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the modern world. Otto Octavius represents the dark side of scientific ambition, a brilliant researcher whose experiments with atomic energy go catastrophically wrong. The accident that transforms him into Dr. Octopus occurs at a facility much like the one where Peter was bitten by the radioactive spider, but where Peter's transformation gave him abilities that he chose to use for good. Otto's accident creates a being driven by megalomania and resentment. The four mechanical arms that become fused to Octavius's body are marvels of engineering, responding to his mental commands and possessing strength far beyond human norms. But the same radiation that gave him control over these weapons also affected his mind, amplifying his natural arrogance and intellectual superiority into something approaching madness. Dr. Octopus doesn't just want to commit crimes, he wants to prove his superiority over everyone he encounters, especially the wall-crawling hero who dares to oppose him. Peter's first battle with Dr. Octopus nearly ends in disaster. The villain's experience and ruthlessness catch the young hero off guard, and the mechanical arms prove to be more versatile and dangerous than Peter initially realizes. The defeat is both humiliating and educational, teaching Peter that good intentions and spider powers aren't enough to guarantee victory against determined opponents. The Lizard presents a different kind of challenge, a villain who is simultaneously an enemy and a victim deserving of sympathy. Dr. Kurt Connors is a good man driven to desperate measures by his desire to help others, a scientist who loses his arm in the war and dedicates his life to finding ways to help amputees regenerate lost limbs. His research into lizard DNA leads him to develop a serum that can regrow human tissue, but the transformation he undergoes goes far beyond mere regeneration. When Connors tests the serum on himself, he regains his missing arm but also begins transforming into something that's no longer entirely human. The lizard DNA doesn't just regrow his limb, it rewrites his entire genetic structure, turning him into a massive reptilian creature with incredible strength and a predatory intelligence that views humans as prey. Spider-Man's battles with the lizard force Peter to confront the complexity of heroism. This isn't a simple case of good versus evil. Connors is a victim of his own noble intentions, transformed against his will into something monstrous. Peter's goal isn't to defeat the lizard in the traditional sense, but to find a way to reverse the transformation and restore Connors to his human form. The emotional weight of these encounters begins to accumulate as Peter realizes that being a hero involves more than just stopping criminals. He's responsible not just for protecting innocent people, but for finding ways to help his enemies when possible. The line between hero and villain isn't always clear, and the choices Peter makes in these grey areas will define the kind of hero he becomes. Despite his nocturnal activities as Spider-Man, Peter still has to navigate the complex social ecosystem of Midtown High School, where his enhanced abilities create as many problems as they solve. The physical changes brought on by the spider bite, improved muscle tone, perfect vision, enhanced reflexes don't go unnoticed by his classmates, but Peter has to be constantly careful not to reveal the true extent of his transformation. Flash Thompson continues to be Peter's primary antagonist at school, but their dynamic becomes increasingly complicated as Peter's confidence grows. The old patterns of bullying become harder to maintain when the victim no longer seems genuinely intimidated. Peter has to restrain himself constantly, pretending to be weaker and more vulnerable than he actually is to avoid revealing his secret identity. The cruel irony of Flash's hero worship of Spider-Man adds another layer of complexity to their relationship. Flash collects Spider-Man memorabilia, defends the hero against critics, and even starts a Spider-Man fan club at school. He has no idea that he's praising the same person he torments every day, and Peter is forced to listen to Flash's enthusiastic defenses of his alter ego while enduring continued abuse as Peter Parker. Liz Allen represents the first real test of Peter's commitment to maintaining his secret identity. Liz has always been one of the popular students who barely acknowledged Peter's existence, but as his confidence grows and his mysterious absences from school create an aura of intrigue around him, she begins to take notice. Her interest in Peter creates jealousy among other students and complications in his relationship with Betty Brant. The academic side of Peter's life suffers as his crime-fighting activities consume more and more of his time and energy. His grades, once perfect, begin to slip as he misses classes and arrives late to school. Teachers who once considered him one of their best students start to worry about his attitude and commitment. The guidance counselor calls him in for conferences about his college prospects, not knowing that Peter's real concerns involve much more immediate dangers than standardized tests and application deadlines. Aunt May notices the changes in Peter's behavior, but attributes them to the normal process of teenage adjustment following Uncle Ben's death. She worries about his late nights and frequent absences, the mysterious phone calls and unexplained injuries, but she respects his privacy and trusts in the values that she and Ben worked so hard to instill in him. Her faith in Peter's fundamental goodness is both touching and heartbreaking, given how much he's hiding from her. As Peter gains experience as Spider-Man, his victories begin to mount, each success building his confidence and refining his understanding of how to use his abilities effectively. The defeats that marked his early adventures give way to more decisive victories as he learns to anticipate his enemies' tactics and develop countermeasures for their various abilities. The formation of the Sinister Six represents the first major test of Spider-Man's growth as a hero. Dr. Octopus, frustrated by his repeated defeats at the hands of the Wall-Crawler, assembles a team of Spider-Man's most dangerous enemies, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Sandman, and Vulture, with the goal of destroying their common enemy once and for all. The villain's plan seems foolproof in its simplicity. They'll challenge Spider-Man to face them one at a time, preventing him from using his mobility and agility to avoid their attacks. Each villain will fight him separately, wearing him down until he's too exhausted and injured to continue. What they don't account for is Peter's determination and his ability to learn from each encounter. The battles that follow test every aspect of Spider-Man's abilities and character. Against Electro, he must overcome his fear of the villain's electrical attacks and find ways to ground himself safely. Kraven the Hunter forces him to match wits with one of the world's greatest trackers, using his spider sense and web shooters to outmaneuver someone who has spent his life studying predator-prey relationships. Each victory comes at a cost, leaving Peter more tired and injured, but also more confident in his abilities. The psychological pressure of facing 6 enemies in succession forces him to push beyond his perceived limitations and discover reserves of strength and determination he didn't know he possessed. The final confrontation with Dr. Octopus becomes a battle of intellects as much as strength. Otto's mechanical arms give him a significant advantage in close combat, but Peter's speed and unpredictability allow him to stay one step ahead of the villain's attacks. The victory comes not from overpowering his enemy, but from outwitting him, using Octopus's own arrogance and overconfidence against him. The defeat of the Sinister Six marks a turning point in Spider-Man's career. No longer can he be dismissed as a lucky amateur or a temporary annoyance. He has proven himself capable of facing multiple enemies simultaneously and emerging victorious through skill, determination, and moral courage. As Peter's confidence as Spider-Man grows, so does his understanding of what it means to be a hero in the modern world. The simple moral clarity of his early adventures, stopping robbers, rescuing people from burning buildings, preventing muggings, gives way to more complex challenges that require not just physical courage but wisdom and judgment. The relationship between Spider-Man and the New York Police Department remains complicated throughout this period. Some officers, particularly the older veterans, appreciate having a costumed hero helping to keep the streets safe. They recognize that Spider-Man's abilities allow him to intervene in situations where normal police procedures might fail, and they're grateful for his assistance in capturing dangerous criminals. But other members of the force view Spider-Man with suspicion and hostility. They see him as a vigilante who operates outside the law, someone who might have good intentions but who ultimately undermines the authority of legitimate law enforcement. The fact that he wears a mask and refuses to reveal his identity only increases their distrust. Jonah Jameson's editorial campaign against Spider-Man begins to influence public opinion, creating a segment of the population that views the wall-crawler as a menace rather than a hero. Jameson's accusations that Spider-Man is a showboater seeking personal glory, that he's probably in league with the criminals he pretends to fight, that his presence encourages copycat vigilantes and undermines respect for law and order, find receptive audiences among people who are uncomfortable with the idea of costumed heroes. The psychological toll of living a double life begins to accumulate during this period. Peter finds himself increasingly isolated from his peers, unable to share the experiences that are defining his adolescence. He can't tell his friends about the incredible adventures he's having, can't seek advice about the moral dilemmas he faces, can't even complain about the physical exhaustion that comes from fighting crime all night and attending school all day. The relationship with Betty Brant provides some relief from this isolation, giving Peter someone he can be partially honest with about his life. While he can't reveal his secret identity, he can share some of his concerns about responsibility, justice, and the difficulty of doing the right thing in complex situations. Betty's maturity and life experience make her a valuable sounding board for Peter's developing moral philosophy. But even this relationship is complicated by Peter's dual identity. His frequent disappearances and mysterious injuries worry Betty, who begins to suspect that Peter might be involved in something dangerous. She knows he's hiding something from her, but she has no idea how significant that secret really is. The financial pressures on the Parker household continue throughout this period, despite Peter's income from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle. Aunt May's medical expenses, combined with the ongoing costs of maintaining their home and Peter's education, stretch their resources thin. Peter wants to contribute more to the family income, but his crime-fighting activities limit his ability to take on additional work. The moral weight of Uncle Ben's death continues to influence every decision Peter makes as Spider-Man. The memory of his failure, his choice to let the thief escape rather than take responsibility for stopping him, serves as a constant reminder of the stakes involved in his heroic activities. Every criminal he allows to escape might go on to hurt innocent people. Every villain he fails to stop completely might return to threaten the city again. This sense of responsibility becomes both Spider-Man's greatest strength and his heaviest burden. It drives him to push himself beyond his physical and emotional limits, to take risks that no sensible person would consider, to sacrifice his own comfort and happiness for the sake of strangers who will never know what he's done for them. The teenager who once used his powers to win prize money in wrestling matches has become something else entirely, a genuine hero, driven by conscience and tempered by tragedy. The lessons learned in these early years of crime fighting will shape Spider-Man's approach to heroism for the rest of his career, establishing the patterns of self-sacrifice and moral courage that will define his legend. As Peter prepares to graduate from high school and face the challenges of adulthood, he carries with him the hard-won wisdom of someone who has learned that great power really does come with great responsibility. The boy who was bitten by a radioactive spider has become a man, and that man has chosen to dedicate his life to protecting others from the kind of senseless tragedy that claimed Uncle Ben's life. The amazing early years of Spider-Man's career have ended, but they have established the foundation for everything that will follow. Peter Parker knows who he is now, what he stands for, and what he's willing to sacrifice to live up to the legacy of the man who raised him. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The transition from high school to college represents a new chapter in Peter Parker's life, one filled with both opportunities and challenges that will test his ability to balance his dual identity in ways he's never experienced before. Empire State University, located in Manhattan, offers Peter the chance to pursue his passion for science while remaining close enough to home to continue his responsibilities as Spider-Man and his care for Aunt May. The campus itself is a sprawling collection of modern buildings and ivy-covered halls, representing the kind of academic excellence that Peter has dreamed of since childhood. The science facilities are state-of-the-art, equipped with laboratories and research equipment that make his high school chemistry sets look like toys. For someone with Peter's intellectual curiosity and scientific aptitude, ESU represents a paradise of learning and discovery. But the university also presents social challenges that Peter hasn't fully anticipated. The comfortable anonymity of high school, where he was just the class brain that everyone ignored, gives way to a more complex social environment where students are expected to be more mature, more independent, and more socially engaged. The awkward teenager who could disappear into the background at Midtown High finds that college demands a more active participation in campus life. Peter's dual identity creates immediate complications. The irregular schedule required for crime fighting makes it difficult to maintain consistent study habits or participate in campus activities. Late nights spent patrolling the city as Spider-Man leave him exhausted during morning lectures. Sudden emergencies that require Spider-Man's intervention force him to miss classes or leave study groups without explanation. His professors, initially impressed by Peter's obvious intelligence and academic preparation, begin to worry about his inconsistent attendance and apparent lack of commitment to his studies. They see a student with tremendous potential who seems to be wasting his opportunities, unaware that his absences are the result of his heroic activities rather than laziness or disinterest. The financial pressures that have always shadowed the Parker family become even more acute in the college environment. Tuition, books, and living expenses stretch the family budget to its breaking point. Despite Peter's income from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle, Aunt May insists on contributing to Peter's education costs, working extra hours at various part-time jobs to help make ends meet, though Peter wishes she wouldn't sacrifice her health and comfort for his sake. Peter's introduction to his college classmates comes through a series of chance encounters that will shape his relationships for years to come. Harry Osborn, the son of wealthy industrialist Norman Osborn, represents everything that Peter is not. privileged, confident, and socially comfortable in ways that come from a lifetime of wealth and status. Harry's initial reaction to Peter is a mixture of curiosity and condescension. He's accustomed to being surrounded by people who want something from him: access to his father's money, connections to influential people, or simply the reflected glory of associating with wealth. Isates Tierney and Hend of Nextby, the was hounded Tierney and the Muir. Peter's obvious disinterest in Harry's family fortune and social status intrigues him, suggesting a potential for genuine friendship rather than opportunistic exploitation. The development of their friendship is gradual and sometimes awkward. Harry's natural generosity and desire for authentic relationships conflicts with Peter's need to maintain his secrets and his discomfort with accepting help from someone so much wealthier than himself. Harry wants to share his privileges, paying for meals, providing rides in expensive cars, offering access to exclusive social events, while Peter struggles with the guilt of accepting charity and the fear that too much scrutiny might reveal his secret identity. Gwen Stacy enters Peter's life like a ray of sunshine, representing everything positive and hopeful about the college experience. She's intelligent without being intimidating, beautiful without being vain, and possessed of a natural kindness that draws people to her. Her father, Captain George Stacy, is a police captain whose dedication to justice and public service mirrors Peter's own moral compass. Gwen's initial impression of Peter is complicated by his mysterious behavior and frequent absences. She sees glimpses of his intelligence and humor, moments when his guard drops and he allows his natural personality to shine through. But she also notices his tendency to disappear without explanation, his apparent lack of interest in normal college social activities, and the way he sometimes seems to be carrying burdens far heavier than any student should bear. The romantic tension between Peter and Gwen develops slowly, complicated by Peter's inability to be completely honest about his life and his fears about putting someone he cares about in danger. He's learned from his relationship with Betty Brant that caring about someone while living a double life creates risks for both parties, and he's reluctant to expose Gwen to those same dangers. Flash Thompson's presence at ESU on a football scholarship creates continuity with Peter's high school experiences, but also highlights how much both young men have grown and changed. The university environment doesn't eliminate Flash's tendency toward bullying and social dominance, but it does moderate these behaviors somewhat, as the more mature social expectations of college life make his high school tactics less effective. The dynamic between Peter and Flash becomes more complex as they both mature and develop new interests and relationships. Flash's continued hero worship of Spider-Man creates opportunities for unintentional comedy, as he enthusiastically defends his idol to the very person he continues to antagonize. Peter finds himself in the surreal position of listening to Flash praise Spider-Man's latest adventures, while simultaneously dealing with Flash's casual cruelty toward Peter Parker. The medical emergency that brings Peter's college experience into sharp focus occurs during his first semester, when Aunt May suddenly collapses at home and is rushed to the hospital with what doctors initially suspect might be a heart attack. The crisis forces Peter to confront the reality that the woman who raised him is not immortal, that the secure foundation of his life might be more fragile than he's allowed himself to believe. The hospital vigil becomes a test of Peter's priorities and his ability to manage his dual responsibilities. While he sits beside Aunt May's bed, monitoring her condition and providing what comfort he can, the city continues to need Spider-Man's protection. Criminal activity doesn't pause for personal emergencies, and Peter finds himself torn between his duty to his family and his obligation to the innocent people who depend on his heroic intervention. The doctor's diagnosis reveals that May's condition is serious but treatable, requiring medication that is both expensive and difficult to obtain. The financial cost of her treatment threatens to exhaust the family's limited resources, while the rarity of the required medication creates a desperate urgency that conventional medical channels might not be able to address quickly enough. Peter's search for the medication leads him into conflict with Dr. Octopus, who has coincidentally stolen the same rare drug for his own experimental purposes. The battle that follows takes place in Octopus's underwater laboratory, a testament to the villain's megalomaniacal ambition and his complete disregard for the lives of ordinary people who might need the medication he's stolen. The underwater battle represents one of Peter's most challenging physical conflicts to date. Fighting in an environment where his mobility is limited and his web shooters are less effective, Peter must rely more heavily on his strength and durability than on his usual tactics of speed and agility. The confined space of the laboratory prevents him from using his full range of acrobatic abilities, forcing him to adapt his fighting style to the unique challenges of underwater combat. But the real test comes when the laboratory's structure is damaged during the fight, threatening to collapse and trap both Peter and the unconscious Dr. Octopus beneath tons of debris and rushing water. In one of the most iconic moments of his early career, Peter finds himself pinned under massive machinery, too weak from the battle to free himself through normal means, facing the possibility that both he and Aunt May will die because of his failure. The moment when Peter summons the strength to lift the seemingly impossible weight that traps him has become one of the most celebrated sequences in comic book history, representing the triumph of will over circumstance and the power of love to inspire superhuman effort. The moment when Peter summons the strength to lift the seemingly impossible weight that traps him has become trapped beneath machinery that should be far too heavy for even his enhanced strength to move. Peter faces the ultimate test of his character and determination. The water rising around him serves as a literal deadline, marking the finite time he has to escape before drowning becomes inevitable. But the real motivation comes from his knowledge that Aunt May's life depends on his success. The medication he needs to save her lies within reach, but only if he can free himself from the trap that threatens to become his tomb. The physical effort required to lift the machinery pushes Peter beyond any previous limits he's experienced. The spider bite gave him proportional strength, but what he discovers in this moment is that his true power comes not from the radioactive enhancement of his muscles, but from the strength of his character and the depth of his love for the people who depend on him. Uncle Ben's memory provides the emotional fuel for Peter's superhuman effort. The man who taught him about responsibility, who believed in his potential for greatness, who died because Peter failed to live up to his moral obligations, becomes a spiritual presence, urging him to find the strength to continue. The lesson that great power comes with great responsibility takes on new meaning as Peter realizes that his power is truly great only when it's motivated by love and guided by conscience. The moment of breakthrough when Peter finally finds the strength to lift the massive weight that pins him represents a transformation that goes beyond the merely physical. The young man who emerges from that underwater laboratory is no longer the uncertain teenager who gained spider powers by accident. He has become someone who understands the true source of his strength and the real nature of his responsibility. The successful rescue of the medication and the subsequent recovery of Aunt May's health provide immediate rewards for Peter's heroic effort. But the more lasting impact comes from his new understanding of what it means to be a hero. The power to help others isn't just about having enhanced abilities, it's about the willingness to push beyond perceived limitations when the stakes are high enough. Peter's return to college life after the crisis with Aunt May's health brings new challenges as he tries to rebuild his academic standing while maintaining his heroic activities. The time missed during his aunt's illness has created gaps in his coursework that require extra effort to overcome, while his professor's patience with his irregular attendance has begun to wear thin. The social dynamics of college life continue to evolve as Peter, Harry, and Gwen settle into more established patterns of friendship and potential romance. Harry's generosity and desire for genuine friendship create opportunities for deeper connections, but also generate situations where Peter's secrets threaten to create complications or misunderstandings. Gwen's growing interest in Peter creates both opportunities and dilemmas. Her intelligence and perceptiveness make her an ideal companion for someone with Peter's intellectual interests, but they also make her more likely to notice the inconsistencies in his behavior and to ask the kinds of probing questions that might reveal his secret identity. The romantic tension between Peter and Gwen develops against the backdrop of his continued relationship with Betty Brant, creating a complex emotional situation that Peter is ill-equipped to handle. His inexperience with romantic relationships combined with the complications created by his double life makes it difficult for him to navigate the competing demands of loyalty, honesty, and desire. Betty's increasing suspicions about Peter's mysterious activities create strain in their relationship as she begins to suspect that he might be involved in something dangerous or illegal. Her concern for his well-being conflicts with her growing frustration at his unwillingness to be completely honest with her about his life and activities. The financial pressures on the Parker family continue to influence Peter's college experience as the costs of Aunt May's medical treatment add to the existing burden of tuition and living expenses. Peter's income from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle provides some relief, but the irregular nature of news photography makes it difficult to budget or plan for consistent earnings. Jonah Jameson's continued editorial campaign against Spider-Man creates additional complications for Peter's college life as his classmates and professors are exposed to constant negative coverage of his heroic alter ego. The anti-Spider-Man sentiment that Jameson works so hard to cultivate affects public opinion in ways that make Peter's crime-fighting activities more difficult and dangerous. The introduction of Captain George Stacy into Peter's life brings a new dynamic to his relationships and his understanding of his role as a hero. Stacy represents the best qualities of law enforcement: integrity, intelligence, and a genuine commitment to protecting innocent people from criminal activity. His position as Gwen's father also makes him someone Peter wants to impress and respect. Captain Stacy's professional interest in Spider-Man creates an unusual situation where Peter finds himself being studied and evaluated by someone whose opinion matters to him personally. Stacy's analysis of Spider-Man's methods and motivations is based on years of police experience and a deep understanding of criminal behavior, making his insights particularly valuable. The respect that Captain Stacy shows for Spider-Man's abilities and moral character provides Peter with validation from an authority figure whose judgment he trusts. When someone with Stacy's experience and integrity concludes that Spider-Man is a force for good in the city, it helps counteract some of the negative publicity generated by J. Jonah Jameson's editorial campaign. But Captain Stacy's support comes with expectations and responsibilities that add pressure to Peter's heroic activities. Knowing that a respected police officer is counting on Spider-Man's assistance makes it even more important for Peter to live up to the highest standards of heroic behavior. The relationship between Captain Stacy and Peter Parker, separate from his professional interest in Spider-Man, develops into something approaching a father-son dynamic. Stacy's wisdom, experience, and moral guidance help fill some of the void left by Uncle Ben's death, providing Peter with an adult male role model who shares his commitment to justice and public service. The tragic irony of Captain Stacy's eventual fate, his death during a battle between Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus, represents one of the most heartbreaking aspects of Peter's heroic career. The man who understood and supported Spider-Man's mission becomes a casualty of the very criminal activity that Spider-Man works so hard to prevent. As Peter's college years progress, the web of relationships surrounding his dual identity becomes increasingly complex and difficult to manage. Each new person who enters his life represents both an opportunity for meaningful connection and a potential threat to the security of his secret identity. The friendship with Harry Osborn deepens despite the obstacles created by their different backgrounds and Peter's need for secrecy. Harry's genuine affection for Peter and his desire to help his friend create situations where Peter must carefully balance acceptance of assistance with the need to maintain his independence and protect his secrets. The romantic relationship with Gwen Stacy becomes the central emotional focus of Peter's college experience, representing the possibility of genuine love and companionship despite the complications created by his double life. Gwen's intelligence, compassion, and strength make her an ideal partner for someone with Peter's complex responsibilities and moral commitments. But the relationship also creates new vulnerabilities and anxieties for Peter. His love for Gwen makes him more aware of the dangers that his heroic activities might create for the people closest to him. The knowledge that criminals might target Spider-Man's loved ones forces Peter to be constantly vigilant about protecting Gwen without revealing the true reason for his concern. The continued presence of Flash Thompson in Peter's college environment provides both continuity and contrast with his high school experiences. Flash's character development during the university years shows glimpses of the man he will eventually become, someone capable of genuine heroism and loyalty, despite his current limitations and prejudices. The academic environment of Empire State University provides Peter with intellectual challenges and opportunities that complement his heroic activities. The advanced science courses expose him to concepts and technologies that prove useful in his crime-fighting career, while the research opportunities allow him to develop skills and knowledge that enhance his effectiveness as Spider-Man. The professors and graduate students who populate Peter's academic world represent potential mentors and colleagues, but also create additional complications for his time management and secret keeping. The expectations of academic excellence and consistent performance conflict with the irregular demands of his heroic responsibilities. As Peter prepares to complete his undergraduate education and face the challenges of graduate school or professional life, he carries with him the lessons learned during these formative college years. The relationships forged, the challenges overcome, and the moral principles refined during this period will continue to influence his development as both a hero and a human being. The young man who entered Empire State University as an uncertain teenager emerges as someone with a clearer understanding of his responsibilities, his capabilities, and his commitment to using his powers in service of others. The college years have tested his character in new ways and prepared him for the even greater challenges that lie ahead. The shadow that will cast itself across Peter Parker's life for generations begins with the introduction of Norman Osborn, a figure who embodies both the promise and the corruption of American business success. As the head of Oscorp Industries, one of New York's most prominent chemical and manufacturing companies, Norman represents the kind of achievement that the American dream promises, a self-made man who has built an empire through intelligence, determination, and ruthless ambition. Norman's relationship with his son Harry provides Peter with his first glimpse into the complex dynamics of the Osborn family. Where Harry is warm, generous, and eager for genuine friendship, Norman is calculating, demanding, and seemingly incapable of expressing unconditional love for his son. The wealth and power that make the Osborn name so prominent in New York society come at a personal cost that Harry bears with quiet resignation. The corporate headquarters of Oscorp Industries stands as a monument to Norman's vision and ambition, a gleaming tower filled with laboratories, research facilities, and manufacturing equipment that represent the cutting edge of chemical and technological innovation. But beneath the veneer of legitimate business success lies a darker reality: Oscorp's willingness to pursue profitable ventures regardless of their potential danger to public safety or environmental health. Norman's public persona as respectable businessman and philanthropist conceals the psychological instability that will eventually transform him into one of Spider-Man's most dangerous enemies. The pressures of maintaining his business empire, combined with his obsessive need for control and recognition, create internal tensions that manifest in increasingly erratic behavior and paranoid thinking. The chemical accident that transforms Norman into the Green Goblin occurs during one of his attempts to develop a formula that will enhance human strength and intelligence. The explosion that bathes him in experimental chemicals doesn't just alter his physical capabilities, it amplifies his existing psychological problems and removes the inhibitions that previously kept his darker impulses in check. The Green Goblin persona that emerges from this transformation represents everything that Norman Osborn has suppressed about himself: his resentment of those who don't appreciate his genius, his desire to dominate and control others, and his complete disregard for human life when it conflicts with his personal goals. The goblin costume and glider aren't just tools for criminal activity, they're expressions of Norman's twisted self-image and his need to project power and terror. Spider-Man's first encounters with the Green Goblin establish a pattern of psychological warfare that goes far beyond typical criminal activity. The Goblin doesn't simply rob banks or commit random acts of violence. He orchestrates elaborate schemes designed to torment and humiliate his opponents while demonstrating his intellectual superiority. The Goblin's choice of weapons reflects both his scientific background and his sadistic personality. The pumpkin bombs aren't just explosives, they're carefully designed to create maximum terror and confusion. The razor-sharp bats and other Halloween-themed weapons serve no practical purpose beyond their psychological impact, chosen specifically to create an atmosphere of supernatural dread. The battles between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin become increasingly personal as the villain demonstrates an unsettling knowledge of the hero's fighting style, weaknesses, and psychological vulnerabilities. The Goblin seems to understand Spider-Man in ways that go beyond simple observation, suggesting a deeper connection that Peter can't identify or explain. The taunting and psychological manipulation that characterize the Goblin's attacks create a new kind of challenge for Spider-Man. Previous villains have relied primarily on brute force or exotic abilities, but the Goblin's greatest weapon is his understanding of human psychology and his willingness to exploit emotional vulnerabilities. The mystery of the Green Goblin's identity becomes an obsession for both Spider-Man and the New York City Police Department. The villain's obvious intelligence, resources, and knowledge of advanced chemistry narrow the list of potential suspects, but his careful attention to maintaining his secret identity makes confirmation impossible through normal investigative methods. J. Jonah Jameson's editorial coverage of the Green Goblin creates additional complications for Spider-Man's reputation and public standing. While Jameson continues to portray Spider-Man as a menace, he presents the Green Goblin as an even greater threat, inadvertently creating a situation where Spider-Man appears to be the lesser of two evils in the public's perception. The revelation of Norman Osborn's identity as the Green Goblin comes not through detective work or careful investigation, but through the villain's own hubris and his desire to completely destroy Spider-Man both physically and psychologically. The Goblin's obsession with proving his superiority leads him to take the ultimate risk, discovering and confronting Spider-Man's secret identity. Norman's resources and connections allow him to conduct the kind of investigation that would be impossible for ordinary criminals. His access to corporate databases, surveillance equipment, and private investigators provides him with tools for uncovering Spider-Man's identity that go far beyond what most villains could employ. The discovery that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are the same person transforms Norman's hatred from the impersonal animosity of criminal versus hero into something much more intimate and dangerous. The knowledge that his son's best friend is the masked hero who has repeatedly frustrated his criminal schemes adds personal betrayal to his existing list of grievances. The confrontation in which Norman reveals his knowledge of Peter's secret identity takes place in the familiar surroundings of Peter's own neighborhood, violating the sanctuary of home and family that Peter has tried so hard to protect. The Green Goblin's appearance at Peter's house represents the ultimate invasion of privacy and the destruction of the boundaries between his heroic and personal lives. The battle that follows is unlike any previous confrontation between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, because both combatants now know exactly who they're fighting and what the stakes really are. Peter's knowledge of Norman's identity as Harry's father creates emotional complications that affect his fighting ability, while Norman's understanding of Peter's connection to Aunt May provides him with leverage for psychological manipulation. The physical violence of their confrontation is matched by the emotional intensity of their conflict. Norman's accusations and taunts strike at Peter's deepest insecurities and fears, while Peter's attempts to reason with his enemy are complicated by his knowledge of Norman's relationship to Harry and his responsibility for Harry's emotional well-being. The resolution of the Green Goblin's threat comes not through violence or imprisonment, but through the same kind of chemical accident that created the problem in the first place. The explosion that ends their battle bathes Norman in a combination of chemicals and electrical energy that reverses the transformation process, stripping away both his enhanced abilities and his memories of his time as the Green Goblin. The convenient amnesia that leaves Norman with no memory of his criminal activities or knowledge of Peter's secret identity provides a temporary solution to an otherwise impossible situation. Peter can't simply turn Norman over to the authorities without revealing his own secret identity, and he can't continue to fight someone who is the father of his best friend. But the amnesia solution also creates new moral dilemmas for Peter. He now possesses knowledge of Norman's capacity for evil and violence, information that could protect innocent people from future attacks. His decision to keep Norman's secret, motivated partly by his friendship with Harry and partly by his hope that Norman can genuinely reform, represents a significant moral risk. The aftermath of the Green Goblin revelation forces Peter to reconsider his approach to maintaining his secret identity and protecting the people he cares about. The knowledge that determined enemies can potentially discover his true identity creates new anxieties about the safety of Aunt May, Harry, Gwen, and everyone else in his personal life. Norman's return to his normal life and personality creates a strange new dynamic in Peter's relationship with the Osborn family. Peter must interact with Norman knowing the truth about his capacity for evil, while Norman remains completely unaware of their previous conflicts. The psychological strain of maintaining this deception adds another layer of complexity to Peter's already complicated emotional life. The experience of fighting someone he knows personally, someone who is important to one of his closest friends, teaches Peter that the clear moral distinctions between hero and villain that characterized his early adventures aren't always available in real-world situations. The people he fights against are sometimes connected to the people he cares about in ways that make simple solutions impossible. Into the complex web of relationships surrounding Peter Parker's college years comes a figure who will change everything: Mary Jane Watson, the girl next door who has been a mysterious presence in Peter's life without ever quite making an appearance. Aunt May has been trying to arrange a meeting between Peter and Mary Jane for months. Peter's resistance to meeting Mary Jane stems from his assumption that any girl Aunt May considers suitable for him must be boring, conventional, and completely wrong for someone with his complicated lifestyle. His experience with well-meaning adults trying to arrange his social life has left him skeptical of their judgment and protective of his limited free time. But when Mary Jane finally makes her dramatic entrance into Peter's life, she shatters every expectation he has formed about her. The famous panel revealing her face for the first time, accompanied by her equally famous words, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot," captures not just her stunning beauty, but her confidence, her energy, and her complete comfort with her own appeal. Mary Jane represents something entirely new in Peter's romantic experience. Where Betty Brant was mature and serious, and Gwen Stacy is sweet and wholesome, Mary Jane is vibrant, unpredictable, and seemingly without a care in the world. She approaches life with enthusiasm and optimism that stands in stark contrast to the weight of responsibility that Peter carries as Spider-Man. Her introduction into Peter's social circle creates immediate complications in his relationship with Gwen Stacy. The competition between the two young women for Peter's attention is complicated by their very different personalities and approaches to romance. Gwen's sincere affection and desire for a serious relationship conflicts with Mary Jane's apparent preference for fun and excitement without deep emotional commitment. Peter finds himself caught between two very different visions of what his personal life could become. Gwen represents the possibility of a stable, loving relationship built on shared values and mutual respect. Mary Jane offers the appeal of excitement, spontaneity, and a partner who seems untroubled by the kinds of moral complexities that dominate Peter's life as Spider-Man. The mystery that surrounds Mary Jane's background and her apparent lack of serious concerns about the future intrigues Peter even as it frustrates him. Her refusal to discuss her family situation or her long-term plans suggests depths beneath her party girl exterior that she's not ready to reveal. The death of Captain George Stacy represents one of the most heartbreaking moments in Peter Parker's heroic career, demonstrating how the very people who support and understand Spider-Man's mission can become victims of the criminal activity he works so hard to prevent. The battle with Dr. Octopus that leads to Captain Stacy's death takes place on a construction site in Manhattan, where the villain has chosen to make his stand against both Spider-Man and the police forces trying to apprehend him. The setting provides Octopus with plenty of heavy machinery to use as weapons, while the height of the partially completed building gives him tactical advantages over his ground-based opponents. Captain Stacy's presence at the scene reflects his professional dedication and his personal interest in Spider-Man's activities. As one of the few police officers who genuinely respects and supports the wall-crawler's efforts, Stacy feels a responsibility to coordinate the official response to supervillain threats and to ensure that Spider-Man receives the cooperation he deserves from law enforcement. The battle itself pushes both Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus to their limits, with the villain's mechanical arms proving to be particularly effective in the industrial environment of the construction site. The clash of metal against web, the crash of falling debris, and the shouts of workers and police create a chaotic atmosphere that makes precise control of the situation nearly impossible. The moment when a piece of falling debris threatens a small child in the crowd below creates the split-second decision that costs Captain Stacy his life. Without hesitation, the veteran police officer throws himself forward to push the child to safety, taking the full impact of the falling masonry on himself. His sacrifice saves an innocent life, but it also deprives the world of one of its most principled and dedicated public servants. Captain Stacy's final moments, as he lies dying in Spider-Man's arms, provide one of the most poignant scenes in the web-slinger's history. With his last breath, Stacy reveals that he has known Peter's secret identity for some time, having deduced the truth through careful observation and professional instinct. His final words to Peter, asking him to take care of Gwen and to continue the fight for justice, transform his death from a mere tragedy into a sacred trust. The public reaction to Captain Stacy's death, manipulated by Jonah Jameson's inflammatory reporting, places the blame squarely on Spider-Man's shoulders. The narrative that emerges in the press portrays the wall-crawler as a reckless vigilante whose presence at the scene made the situation more dangerous and directly contributed to the death of a respected police officer. The transformation of Gwen Stacy from Peter's loving girlfriend into someone who blames Spider-Man for her father's death creates one of the most painful situations Peter has ever faced. The woman he loves now sees his alter ego as a murderer, making it impossible for him to comfort her in her grief without revealing the very identity that she would now hate even more than she already hates the costume. Gwen's grief is raw and consuming, fed by the media coverage that portrays Spider-Man as responsible for her father's death and by her own need to find someone to blame for her devastating loss. The rational part of her mind knows that Spider-Man was trying to help, but the emotional reality of her father's absence makes rational analysis impossible. The cruel irony of the situation is that Peter is the person who most wants to comfort Gwen, who understands better than anyone what she's going through, and who shares her grief for the loss of a man who was important to both of them. But his secret identity creates a barrier between them that makes genuine intimacy impossible during her time of greatest need. Peter's attempts to console Gwen as Peter Parker are complicated by her knowledge that he was friends with her father and by her awareness that Peter admired and respected Captain Stacy. She knows that Peter is also grieving, but she can't know that his grief includes the terrible guilt of someone who feels responsible for the death of a mentor and friend. The relationship between Peter and Gwen begins to deteriorate as her hatred for Spider-Man creates a psychological distance that affects all aspects of their interaction. She can't understand why Peter doesn't share her anger toward the wall-crawler, interpreting his defense of Spider-Man's motivations as a betrayal of her father's memory. The stress of maintaining his secret identity while dealing with Gwen's pain pushes Peter to the breaking point emotionally. He begins to question whether his activities as Spider-Man are worth the pain they cause to the people he loves, whether the good he accomplishes is overshadowed by the collateral damage that seems to follow in his wake. The period following Captain Stacy's death represents one of the lowest points in Peter Parker's life, a time when the weight of his responsibilities threatens to crush his spirit and destroy his faith in the value of his heroic mission. The combination of personal grief, romantic turmoil, and public hostility creates a perfect storm of emotional devastation that tests every aspect of his character. Gwen's decision to leave New York and study abroad in London provides temporary relief from the immediate pain of their strained relationship, but it also represents a kind of defeat for Peter. The woman he loves is essentially running away from the life they might have built together, driven away by circumstances that he could have prevented if he had made different choices as Spider-Man. Harry Osborn's struggles with drug addiction during this period add another layer of crisis to Peter's personal life. Harry's descent into substance abuse is partly a response to the pressures of living up to his father's expectations and partly a reaction to the trauma of nearly losing his father to the Green Goblin transformation, though Harry doesn't consciously remember those events. Peter's attempts to help Harry overcome his addiction are complicated by his own emotional state and by the time and energy demands of his activities as Spider-Man. The friend who most needs Peter's support and guidance is the one Peter is least equipped to help, creating additional guilt and feelings of failure. The financial pressures on the Parker household intensify during this period, as Aunt May's medical expenses continue to accumulate, and Peter's emotional state affects his ability to maintain his income from photography. The practical concerns of keeping food on the table and paying rent add mundane stress to the emotional crisis that already threatens to overwhelm Peter's coping mechanisms. Jonah Jameson's continued editorial campaign against Spider-Man reaches new heights of vitriol following Captain Stacy's death, with the publisher using the tragedy as proof of his long-standing claims about the wall crawler's dangerous impact on the city. The constant negative coverage makes Peter's activities as Spider-Man more difficult and dangerous, while also reinforcing his own doubts about the value of his heroic mission. The isolation that Peter feels during this period is profound and debilitating. He can't share his grief with anyone who would truly understand it, can't seek comfort from the people who care about him most, and can't even defend himself against the accusations that constantly surround his alter ego. The loneliness of the heroic life has never been more apparent or more painful. During Peter's darkest hour, when grief and guilt threaten to destroy his will to continue as Spider-Man, Mary Jane Watson emerges as an unexpected source of strength and support. The party girl who seemed interested only in fun and excitement reveals depths of compassion and understanding that surprise both Peter and herself. Mary Jane's approach to helping Peter differs significantly from the methods that other people in his life might use. She doesn't try to analyze his problems or offer practical solutions. Instead, she simply provides a presence that's consistently positive and supportive, offering distraction from his pain without dismissing the reality of his suffering. Her natural optimism and zest for life serve as a counterbalance to Peter's tendency toward brooding and self-recrimination. When Peter becomes lost in guilt and regret, Mary Jane's energy and enthusiasm remind him that life still contains possibilities for joy and fulfillment, even in the aftermath of tragedy. The relationship that develops between Peter and Mary Jane during this period is built on a foundation of mutual need and complementary strengths. Peter needs someone who can help him remember how to smile and laugh, while Mary Jane discovers that she needs someone who takes life seriously enough to balance her own tendency to avoid difficult emotions and situations. Mary Jane's intuitive understanding of Peter's emotional needs suggests a perceptiveness that goes beyond her party girl persona. She seems to know exactly when to provide companionship and when to give him space, when to engage in light-hearted banter, and when to offer a more serious kind of support. The gradual deepening of their relationship provides Peter with hope for the future and a reason to continue fighting through his current difficulties. Mary Jane represents the possibility that he can find love and happiness despite the complications created by his secret identity and his responsibilities as Spider-Man. But even as their relationship grows stronger, Peter remains aware that Mary Jane doesn't know the whole truth about his life. The secret of his identity continues to create barriers to complete intimacy, even with someone who seems to accept and support him unconditionally. When Gwen Stacy finally returns from her time abroad, she brings with her a new perspective on her father's death and her relationship with Peter Parker. The distance and time have allowed her to process her grief more fully and to recognize that her anger towards Spider-Man, while understandable, has prevented her from appreciating the good that the wall crawler accomplishes. Her reunion with Peter is emotionally complex, filled with the joy of reconnection, but also shadowed by the knowledge of how much both of them have changed during their separation. The love they shared is still present, but it has been complicated by time, distance, and the experiences they've had while apart. Gwen's new understanding of Spider-Man's role in the city creates an opportunity for Peter to rebuild their relationship on a more honest foundation. Her recognition that the web slinger is a force for good, despite the tragic circumstances of her father's death, removes one of the major barriers that had driven them apart. But Peter's relationship with Mary Jane, which has deepened during Gwen's absence, creates new complications that prevent a simple return to their previous romantic dynamic. Peter finds himself caught between his love for Gwen and his growing feelings for Mary Jane, unable to choose between two women who represent very different but equally appealing visions of his future. The triangle that emerges between Peter, Gwen, and Mary Jane becomes one of the defining elements of this period in his life. Both women care about him genuinely, and he cares about both of them, but the situation requires choices that will inevitably cause pain to someone he doesn't want to hurt. Gwen's more mature perspective on life and love developed during her time away makes her a more serious romantic partner, but also increases the stakes of Peter's decision. She's no longer the college girl looking for fun and excitement. She's a woman ready for commitment and lifetime partnership. Mary Jane's reaction to Gwen's return reveals her own emotional growth and the depth of her feelings for Peter. The competitive dynamic that emerges between the two women forces Mary Jane to confront her own tendency to avoid serious emotional commitments and to decide how much she's willing to fight for the relationship she wants. The resolution of this romantic triangle will ultimately depend on choices that are still to come, decisions that will be influenced by events and tragedies that none of them can anticipate. For now, Peter finds himself in the enviable but difficult position of being loved by two remarkable women, each of whom offers him something essential that he needs. As the college years draw to a close and Peter prepares to face the challenges of adult life, the relationships he has formed and the lessons he has learned will continue to shape his development as both a hero and a human being. The tragedies he has endured and the love he has experienced have prepared him for the even greater tests that lie ahead. The boy who gained spider powers in a high school science class has become a man who understands the true cost of heroism and the real meaning of responsibility. The dark days following Captain Stacy's death have passed, but they have left him stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to using his abilities in service of others, regardless of the personal cost. As Peter Parker moves from college into the early stages of adulthood, his relationship with Gwen Stacy deepens into something that feels permanent and life-defining. The woman who returned from London with a more mature perspective on life and love has become the center of Peter's emotional world, representing everything hopeful and positive about his future. Their love during this period has a quality of completeness that Peter has never experienced before. With Gwen, he can imagine a life beyond the constant struggle of being Spider-Man, not abandoning his heroic responsibilities, but finding a balance that allows room for personal happiness and fulfillment. She represents the possibility that he can have both a meaningful relationship and a heroic career, that the sacrifices demanded by his spider powers don't have to include every aspect of his personal life. The depth of their connection makes Peter increasingly protective of Gwen and increasingly worried about the dangers that his double life might create for her. The memory of Captain Stacy's death serves as a constant reminder that the people closest to Spider-Man can become targets for his enemies, and Peter finds himself torn between his desire to share everything with Gwen and his need to protect her from the risks associated with knowing his secret. Gwen's own feelings for Peter have evolved into something approaching total commitment. She has moved past her earlier grief and anger to embrace a future with the man she loves, making plans and dreaming dreams that assume Peter will be a permanent part of her life. Her happiness and optimism during this period make what's to come even more tragic, as she faces her fate with no awareness of the dangers that surround her. The irony of their situation is that both Peter and Gwen are experiencing the deepest love of their lives at the very moment when that love makes them most vulnerable to the cruelties of fate. Their joy in each other creates a target that their enemies can exploit, while their commitment to building a future together makes the destruction of that future even more devastating. Peter's growing understanding of how much he has to lose adds urgency to his activities as Spider-Man. Every criminal he fails to capture completely, every villain who escapes to fight another day, represents a potential threat to the happiness he has found with Gwen. The stakes of his heroic mission have never been higher or more personal. The psychological pressures that have been building in Norman Osborn's mind since his apparent recovery from the Green Goblin transformation finally reach a breaking point, triggered by his son Harry's continued struggles with drug addiction and the mounting business pressures at Oscorp Industries. Sleepy Spidey, the amnesia that protected both Norman and Peter from the consequences of their previous conflicts begins to crack under the weight of stress and circumstance. The return of Norman's memories comes in fragments at first, disconnected images and emotions that he can't quite place or understand. The sight of Spider-Man in news footage creates feelings of rage and hatred that seem disproportionate to any rational response. The presence of Peter Parker in his home, visiting Harry, generates suspicion and unease that Norman can't explain or dismiss. As more of his memories return, Norman begins to piece together the truth about his time as the Green Goblin and his knowledge of Spider-Man's secret identity. The process is gradual and maddening, as he struggles to distinguish between real memories and what might be elaborate hallucinations or dreams. The uncertainty about his own mental state adds another layer of instability to his already fragile psychological condition. The full restoration of Norman's memories and his Green Goblin persona doesn't happen all at once, but rather through a series of triggering events that gradually break down the mental barriers created by his chemical-induced amnesia. Harry's latest overdose serves as the final catalyst, convincing Norman that his son's problems are somehow connected to Peter Parker and his hidden activities. Norman's investigation into Peter's secret identity the second time around is more systematic and thorough than his first discovery. He uses all of the resources at his disposal: corporate surveillance equipment, private investigators, and his own scientific expertise to build an airtight case that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are the same person. The knowledge that his son's best friend is the masked hero who has repeatedly humiliated him adds a personal dimension to Norman's hatred that makes his return as the Green Goblin even more dangerous than before. This isn't just about criminal ambition or the desire to prove his superiority. It's about revenge against someone who has betrayed his family's trust and hospitality. The Green Goblin's scheme to destroy Spider-Man psychologically rather than simply killing him represents the culmination of Norman Osborn's twisted genius and his deep understanding of human psychology. Having learned Peter's secret identity, the Goblin knows exactly how to strike at his enemy's heart in the most devastating way possible. The decision to target Gwen Stacy instead of Aunt May or Harry reflects the Goblin's analysis of what would hurt Peter the most. Aunt May represents Peter's past and his sense of family obligation, while Harry represents friendship and loyalty. But Gwen represents Peter's future, his hopes for personal happiness, and his belief that he can have a normal life despite his heroic responsibilities. All Baruch, Zufu Welius Brugog, Sufuik. The Goblin's kidnapping of Gwen is orchestrated with theatrical flair, designed not just to lure Spider-Man into a trap, but to maximize the psychological impact of the confrontation. The choice of the Brooklyn Bridge as the site of their final battle adds symbolic weight to the encounter, with the height and structural complexity of the bridge creating multiple opportunities for tragedy. Norman's preparation for this encounter goes beyond simply choosing the location and kidnapping his victim. He has studied Spider-Man's fighting patterns, analyzed his strengths and weaknesses, and developed specific tactics designed to neutralize the wall crawler's advantages. The Green Goblin, who faces Spider-Man on the Brooklyn Bridge, is a more dangerous and focused opponent than ever before. The psychological warfare that the Goblin employs during their confrontation is as important as the physical battle itself. His taunts and revelations are calculated to distract Peter, to make him doubt himself and his abilities at the crucial moment when perfect concentration is required. The villain understands that Spider-Man's greatest strength, his emotional commitment to protecting innocent people, can also be his greatest weakness. The presence of Gwen as a helpless victim creates the kind of impossible situation that the Green Goblin specializes in creating. Peter must simultaneously fight for his own life, protect Gwen from harm, and prevent the Goblin from escaping to threaten other innocent people. The multiple objectives make it impossible for him to focus entirely on any single aspect of the crisis. The confrontation on the Brooklyn Bridge unfolds with a terrible sense of inevitability, as if all of the events of Peter Parker's life have been leading to this moment of ultimate testing. The setting itself, suspended high above the East River with the lights of the city spread out below, creates a dramatic backdrop that emphasizes the epic nature of the struggle taking place. The Green Goblin's arrival on his mechanical glider, with Gwen unconscious and helpless in his grasp, immediately establishes the stakes of the encounter. Peter's spider sense screams warnings about the multiple dangers surrounding him, but his emotional response to seeing Gwen in peril threatens to override the tactical thinking that might save both their lives. The Goblin's taunts reveal not only his knowledge of Peter's secret identity, but also his understanding of the psychological pressure that knowledge creates. He knows that Peter can't simply attack him without regard for Gwen's safety, and he exploits that limitation to gain tactical advantages throughout their battle. The physical combat that takes place on and around the bridge structure pushes both combatants to their limits. The Green Goblin's glider provides him with mobility and aerial advantages, while Spider-Man's web-slinging and wall-crawling abilities allow him to navigate the bridge's complex geometry in ways that his enemy can't match. Forden, Shiksu Spusit P. Smars to Volfalls, Suntimin Time Sink, Suntimi can't match. But the real battle is psychological, as Peter struggles to maintain his focus and tactical thinking while being confronted with the sight of the woman he loves in mortal danger. The Goblin's threats and descriptions of what he plans to do to Gwen if Spider-Man doesn't surrender create emotional pressure that makes rational decision-making nearly impossible. The moment when the Green Goblin releases Gwen from the bridge occurs so suddenly that Peter's enhanced reflexes barely have time to respond. The sight of the woman he loves falling toward the water far below triggers every protective instinct he possesses, overriding tactical considerations and flooding his system with adrenaline and desperation. The split second in which Peter fires his webline to catch Gwen as she falls represents one of the most crucial moments in Spider-Man's entire career, a decision made with perfect heroic intentions that leads to the most tragic outcome imaginable. His response is exactly what any hero would do in the same situation: use his abilities to save the person he loves from certain death. The physics of the situation create a deadly trap that even Peter's enhanced abilities cannot overcome. Gwen's fall has accelerated her to a speed that makes any sudden stop potentially fatal, while the distance involved and the need for split-second timing make a gentle rescue virtually impossible. The very powers that make Spider-Man a hero become the instruments of the tragedy he's trying to prevent. The sickening snap that accompanies the moment when Peter's webline catches Gwen marks the end of more than just her life. It represents the death of Peter's faith in his ability to protect the people he loves and his belief that good intentions and heroic effort are enough to prevent tragedy. The sound will haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. The silence that follows as Peter realizes what has happened stretches for an eternity. The woman who represented his future, his happiness, and his hope for a normal life despite his heroic responsibilities hangs motionless at the end of his webline, victim of the very powers that were supposed to save her. The Green Goblin's reaction to Gwen's death reveals the depth of his madness and his complete absence of human empathy. Rather than being horrified by the tragedy he has orchestrated, he celebrates it as proof of his superiority over Spider-Man and his success in destroying his enemy's spirit. His laughter echoes across the bridge, a sound that captures the pure evil of his nature. Peter's response to Gwen's death and the Goblin's celebration of it represents a moment when he comes closer to abandoning his moral principles than at any other time in his career. The rage that fills him threatens to override the ethical constraints that Uncle Ben's teachings have instilled, creating the possibility that he might cross the line from hero to killer. The battle that follows Gwen's death is unlike any previous confrontation between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, fueled by grief, rage, and a desire for vengeance that threatens to consume Peter's moral identity. The careful control and measured response that characterize his usual fighting style give way to raw fury and an almost savage determination to make the Goblin pay for what he has done. The Green Goblin, having achieved his goal of destroying Spider-Man psychologically, finds himself facing an opponent who no longer feels constrained by the heroic principles that previously limited his actions. The Spider-Man who attacks him with unrestrained ferocity is someone Norman has never encountered before, and the intensity of the assault catches him off guard. Peter's enhanced strength, usually carefully modulated to avoid causing permanent injury to his enemies, is unleashed without reservation for the first time in his career. The blows he delivers to the Green Goblin carry the full weight of his grief and anger, threatening to cause damage that could be fatal even to someone wearing the Goblin's protective costume. The turning point in the battle comes when Peter's webline becomes entangled with the Green Goblin's glider, creating a situation where the villain's own weapon becomes the instrument of his destruction. The irony of the situation, that the Goblin's technology turns against him at the crucial moment, provides a kind of poetic justice that offers small comfort in the aftermath of tragedy. Norman Osborn's death, impaled by his own glider while trying to kill Spider-Man, represents the end of one of the most personal and devastating conflicts in the Wallcrawler's career. But the victory feels hollow and meaningless in the context of what has been lost. Gwen's death cannot be undone by the Goblin's defeat, and Peter's grief cannot be assuaged by revenge. The realization that he came so close to becoming a killer himself adds another layer of trauma to Peter's psychological state. The knowledge that Gwen's death nearly transformed him into the kind of person he has spent his career fighting against creates doubts about his own moral stability and his fitness to continue as a hero. The immediate aftermath of Gwen's death and the Green Goblin's defeat finds Peter in a state of emotional devastation that threatens to destroy his will to continue as Spider-Man. The loss of the woman he loved, combined with the trauma of nearly becoming a killer himself, creates a psychological crisis that challenges every aspect of his heroic identity. The public reaction to the events on the Brooklyn Bridge, filtered through Jonah Jameson's inflammatory reporting, places much of the blame for Gwen's death on Spider-Man's shoulders. The narrative that emerges in the press portrays the Wallcrawler as a reckless vigilante whose presence in the situation escalated the danger and contributed to the tragic outcome. Harry Osborn's reaction to his father's death, coming so soon after his latest struggle with drug addiction, threatens to destroy Peter's oldest friendship. Harry's grief is complicated by his complete ignorance of his father's identity as the Green Goblin and his inability to understand why Spider-Man was involved in the confrontation that led to Norman's death. Aunt May's attempts to comfort Peter in his grief are touching but inadequate to address the full scope of his trauma. She knows that he has lost someone important to him, but she can't understand the complete context of his loss or the guilt and self-doubt that accompany his mourning. The isolation that Peter feels during this period is profound and debilitating. The one person who might have been able to help him process his grief and guilt, Gwen herself, is gone, while the need to maintain his secret identity prevents him from seeking comfort from the other people who care about him. The temptation to abandon his career as Spider-Man becomes stronger than ever during this dark period. The knowledge that his heroic activities directly led to Gwen's death makes it difficult for Peter to believe that the good he accomplishes as Spider-Man is worth the risks he creates for the people he loves. In Peter's darkest hour, when grief and guilt threaten to destroy his will to continue living, Mary Jane Watson emerges as an unexpected source of strength and understanding. The party girl who seemed interested only in fun and excitement reveals a depth of compassion and emotional intelligence that surprises everyone, including herself. Mary Jane's approach to helping Peter cope with his loss is intuitive rather than analytical, based on her understanding of his emotional needs rather than any attempt to provide rational solutions to his problems. She doesn't try to minimize his grief or offer false comfort, but instead provides a consistent presence that reminds him that life still contains possibilities for connection and meaning. Her support during this period transforms their relationship from casual dating to something approaching a true partnership. The crisis that might have driven many people away instead draws Mary Jane closer to Peter, revealing her capacity for loyalty and commitment that goes far beyond her previous reputation for shallow relationships. The way Mary Jane handles Peter's obvious emotional trauma without knowing the full context of what has happened to him demonstrates a sensitivity and perceptiveness that suggests she understands more about his inner life than he realizes. Her ability to provide exactly the kind of support he needs without asking intrusive questions or demanding explanations he can't provide creates a foundation for deep trust and intimacy. Mary Jane's own emotional growth during this period is significant and lasting. The experience of helping someone she cares about through a profound crisis teaches her things about herself and about the nature of love that her previous relationships never revealed. She discovers that she has reserves of strength and compassion that she didn't know existed. The relationship that develops between Peter and Mary Jane in the aftermath of Gwen's death is built on a foundation of mutual need and complementary strengths that will sustain them through many future challenges. Peter needs someone who can help him find reasons to hope and continue fighting, while Mary Jane needs someone whose depth and moral seriousness can help her grow beyond her previous limitations. But even as their relationship deepens and begins to heal some of Peter's emotional wounds, the shadow of Gwen's death continues to influence every aspect of his life. The guilt and self-doubt that her loss created will remain with him for years to come, shaping his understanding of heroism and his approach to relationships in ways that will define his character for decades. The death of Gwen Stacy marks the end of Peter Parker's youth and the beginning of his adult understanding of the true cost of heroism. The lesson that great power comes with great responsibility has been written in blood and grief across his heart, teaching him that even the most noble intentions and the most heroic efforts cannot prevent all tragedies or protect all innocent people. The boy who gained spider powers by accident has become a man who understands that being a hero means accepting the possibility of failure and loss while still finding the strength to continue fighting for what is right. The death of the woman he loved has not destroyed his commitment to using his abilities in service of others, but it has tempered that commitment with a tragic wisdom that will influence every choice he makes for the rest of his life. The months following Gwen Stacy's death pass like a waking nightmare for Peter Parker, each day bringing fresh reminders of what he has lost and new challenges to his will to continue as Spider-Man. The grief that consumes him is unlike anything he experienced even after Uncle Ben's death, because this loss feels like a direct consequence of his choice to live a double life and his failure to protect the person who mattered most to him. The simple act of getting out of bed each morning becomes a monumental effort as Peter struggles to find reasons to continue existing in a world that has taken away his future and his hope for personal happiness. The responsibilities that once motivated him, his duty to Aunt May, his commitment to fighting crime, his obligation to honor Uncle Ben's memory, feel distant and meaningless in the face of his overwhelming grief. Spider-Man's crime-fighting activities during this period become mechanical and joyless, driven more by habit and guilt than by any genuine desire to help others. Peter goes through the motions of heroism, stopping robberies and preventing muggings, but his heart isn't in the work. The satisfaction and sense of purpose that once sustained him through difficult times have been replaced by emptiness and despair. The physical manifestations of Peter's grief begin to affect his superhuman abilities in subtle but significant ways. His spider sense becomes unreliable, failing to warn him of dangers that he should detect easily. His reflexes slow, and his usual graceful web swinging becomes clumsy and uncertain. The connection between his emotional state and his powers suggests that his abilities are more deeply linked to his psychological well-being than he previously realized. Aunt May's attempts to help Peter through his grief are touching but inadequate, hampered by her incomplete understanding of what has happened to him. She knows that he has lost someone important, but she doesn't realize the full extent of his relationship with Gwen or the circumstances of her death. Her gentle encouragement and home-cooked meals provide some comfort, but they can't address the deeper trauma that Peter is experiencing. The isolation that Peter feels during this period is profound and self-reinforcing. His secret identity prevents him from sharing his grief with most of the people who care about him, while his depression makes him reluctant to maintain the social connections that might provide some relief from his pain. He becomes increasingly withdrawn, pushing away friends and avoiding activities that might remind him of happier times. Throughout Peter's darkest period, Mary Jane Watson provides a constant patient presence that gradually becomes essential to his emotional survival. Her approach to helping him heal is subtle and intuitive, based on her understanding that grief cannot be rushed or forced, but must be allowed to run its natural course with the support of people who care. Mary Jane's decision to stay close to Peter during his time of crisis represents a significant change in her own approach to relationships and emotional commitment. The party girl who once avoided serious entanglements and deep emotional connections finds herself drawn into a situation that demands the very qualities she has previously avoided developing. Her methods of providing support are varied and adaptive, changing based on Peter's needs and emotional state from day to day. Sometimes she offers companionship and distraction, engaging him in light conversation or activities that provide temporary relief from his brooding. Other times she simply provides silent presence, letting him know that he's not alone without demanding any response or interaction from him. The wisdom that Mary Jane displays in handling Peter's grief suggests depths of emotional intelligence and life experience that go beyond her apparent carefree exterior. Her ability to know when to push and when to give space, when to offer comfort and when to allow him to feel his pain, indicates an understanding of human psychology that comes from her own experiences with loss and disappointment. Mary Jane's own background, gradually revealed through her interactions with Peter during this period, explains some of her emotional sophistication and her ability to help someone through a crisis. Her family history includes experiences with addiction, abandonment, and emotional trauma that have taught her how to cope with difficult situations and how to support others who are struggling. The relationship that develops between Peter and Mary Jane during his grieving process is built on a foundation of genuine need and mutual support that goes far beyond physical attraction or social compatibility. She becomes essential to his emotional stability, while he provides her with a sense of purpose and meaning that her previous relationships lacked. But Mary Jane's support comes at a personal cost that she bears with remarkable grace and determination. Her social life suffers as she dedicates more time and energy to helping Peter heal. Her own emotional needs are often set aside in favor of providing what he requires. The sacrifice she makes for his well-being demonstrates a capacity for selfless love that surprises everyone who knows her. While Peter struggles with grief and Mary Jane works to help him heal, Harry Osborn faces his own crisis as his father's death and his continued drug problems create a downward spiral that threatens to destroy his life completely. The loss of Norman Osborn, whatever his flaws as a father, removes the last stabilizing influence in Harry's existence and leaves him without the financial and emotional support that had previously kept his addiction manageable. Harry's grief for his father is complicated by his complete ignorance of Norman's identity as the Green Goblin and his involvement in the events that led to Gwen's death. From Harry's perspective, Spider-Man was somehow involved in his father's death, but he has no understanding of the context or justification for the confrontation that ended Norman's life. The anger and resentment that Harry feels towards Spider-Man during this period is fed by his grief and his need to find someone to blame for his loss. His drug-addled thinking makes it difficult for him to process complex emotions or understand nuanced situations, leading him to develop a simplistic narrative where Spider-Man is responsible for all of his problems. Peter's inability to explain the true circumstances of Norman's death creates additional strain in his friendship with Harry. Peter wants to help his friend through his grief and addiction, but he can't provide the context that might help Harry understand what really happened without revealing his secret identity and Norman's criminal activities. The progression of Harry's addiction during this period is heartbreaking to witness, as someone with tremendous potential and resources destroys himself through his inability to cope with emotional pain in healthy ways. His descent from successful college student to desperate addict illustrates the devastating impact that untreated mental health issues can have on even the most privileged individuals. Harry's relationship with his father's business empire becomes another source of stress and confusion during this period. His inheritance of Oscorp Industries gives him access to vast wealth and power, but it also burdens him with responsibilities that he's completely unprepared to handle. The combination of grief, addiction, and business pressure creates a toxic mixture that threatens to overwhelm his already fragile psychological state. The discovery of his father's Green Goblin equipment and research, hidden in secret rooms beneath the Osborn mansion, provides Harry with the means to act on his grief and anger in dangerous ways. The technology that Norman developed for his criminal career offers Harry the opportunity to seek revenge against Spider-Man, but it also exposes him to the same chemical influences that drove his father to madness. During this period of emotional vulnerability and confusion, Peter encounters one of the most disturbing and psychologically damaging experiences of his entire career: the return of Gwen Stacy, or rather someone who appears to be Gwen Stacy but whose existence raises questions about identity, memory, and the nature of human consciousness that Peter is ill-equipped to handle in his current emotional state. The appearance of the Gwen clone is orchestrated by Professor Miles Warren, who has been secretly obsessed with Gwen for years and who blames Spider-Man for her death. Warren's expertise in genetics and cloning technology has allowed him to create a perfect physical duplicate of Gwen, complete with her memories up to a certain point, but the ethical and psychological implications of what he has done are staggering. Peter's first encounter with the Gwen clone is devastating in its emotional impact. The sight of the woman he loved and lost, apparently alive and well, triggers a flood of hope, joy, and confusion that threatens to overwhelm his already fragile psychological state. His rational mind knows that Gwen is dead, but his heart desperately wants to believe that somehow she has returned to him. The clone's own confusion and distress add another layer of complexity to the situation. From her perspective, she is Gwen Stacy, with all of Gwen's memories and emotions intact. She remembers loving Peter, remembers her father's death, remembers all of the experiences that shaped her identity. The knowledge that she might be something other than human threatens to destroy her sense of self and her understanding of her place in the world. The psychological warfare that Professor Warren employs through his manipulation of the Gwen clone represents a new level of cruelty in Peter's rogues gallery. Warren understands that the most effective way to torture Spider-Man isn't through physical violence or threats to innocent people, but through emotional manipulation that strikes at his deepest vulnerabilities and regrets. The moral questions raised by the existence of the Gwen clone challenge Peter's understanding of identity, consciousness, and what it means to be human. If the clone has all of Gwen's memories and personality traits, is she really Gwen? Does her artificial origin make her less deserving of love and protection? How should he relate to someone who is simultaneously the woman he loved and someone completely different? The introduction of a Spider-Man clone into Peter's life during this already difficult period creates an existential crisis that goes to the very heart of his identity and self-understanding. Professor Warren's creation of a perfect duplicate of Peter, complete with all of his memories and personality traits, forces him to confront fundamental questions about what makes him unique and whether his heroic identity is truly his own. The psychological impact of meeting someone who appears to be identical to himself in every way cannot be overstated. The clone has Peter's memories of Uncle Ben's death, his experiences as Spider-Man, his knowledge of his secret identity, and his emotional attachments to the people in his life. From the clone's perspective, he is Peter Parker, and the original Peter is the imposter. The battle between Peter and his clone becomes more than just a physical confrontation. It's a struggle for the right to exist, to claim the identity and relationships that define both of their senses of self. Each believes himself to be the real Peter Parker, and each is willing to fight to defend that claim against someone he sees as a pretender. The resolution of the conflict, which results in the apparent death of the clone and the continuation of Peter's life and identity, provides only temporary relief from the existential questions that the encounter has raised. Even after the clone is gone, Peter is left with doubts about his own authenticity and the nature of his heroic mission. The knowledge that someone else could possess his memories, his abilities, and his moral convictions forces Peter to reconsider what makes him unique as an individual and as a hero. If his heroic identity can be replicated through scientific means, what is the source of his moral authority and his right to make life and death decisions as Spider-Man? The psychological trauma of the clone encounter adds another layer to Peter's already complex emotional state, creating doubts and insecurities that will influence his understanding of himself for years to come. The question of whether he is truly unique, or simply the product of circumstances that could be replicated by others, becomes a source of ongoing anxiety and self-examination. As Peter slowly begins to heal from the trauma of Gwen's death and the psychological challenges of the clone saga, his relationship with Mary Jane deepens into something that both of them recognize as potentially permanent. The crisis they have weathered together has created a bond based on mutual support, understanding, and genuine love that transcends the casual dating relationship they started with. Mary Jane's decision to propose marriage to Peter represents a significant departure from her previous approach to relationships and her long-standing avoidance of serious emotional commitments. The experience of helping him through his darkest period has shown her that she is capable of the kind of deep, lasting love that she previously doubted she could sustain. Her proposal, delivered with characteristic directness and honesty, catches Peter off guard but also provides him with hope for a future that he had thought was impossible after Gwen's death. The knowledge that someone loves him enough to want to build a life with him, despite all of the complications and dangers that come with his secret identity, offers him a chance at the personal happiness that heroism seemed to have made impossible. Peter's initial hesitation about accepting Mary Jane's proposal reflects not any doubt about his love for her, but rather his fear of putting another person he cares about at risk. The memory of Gwen's death serves as a constant reminder of what can happen to the people Spider-Man loves, and Peter is reluctant to expose Mary Jane to those same dangers. But Mary Jane's persistence and her clear-eyed understanding of what she's getting into gradually overcome Peter's protective instincts. She knows that loving Spider-Man means accepting risks and uncertainties that most people never have to face, but she's willing to take those risks because she believes their love is worth the potential costs. The engagement period that follows provides both Peter and Mary Jane with an opportunity to explore what their life together might look like and to develop the communication and trust that will be essential to making their marriage work despite the unique challenges they face. Mary Jane's acceptance of Peter's heroic responsibilities, even without knowing his secret identity, demonstrates a maturity and understanding that makes her an ideal partner for someone in his situation. She doesn't ask him to choose between her and his other obligations, but rather seeks to find a way for all of his responsibilities to coexist in a sustainable balance. The decision to marry Mary Jane represents a turning point in Peter Parker's life, marking his transition from someone defined primarily by loss and guilt to someone who has found the strength to hope for happiness despite the tragedies he has experienced.
Pause.
The proposal acceptance comes after months of healing, growth, and the gradual recognition that Gwen's death, while devastating, doesn't have to define the rest of his life. The practical preparations for marriage force Peter to confront questions about his future that he has been avoiding since Gwen's death. Where will they live? How will they manage their finances? What kind of life do they want to build together? These mundane considerations provide a welcome contrast to the existential crises and emotional traumas that have dominated his recent experiences. Mary Jane's integration into Peter's existing relationships and responsibilities creates new dynamics that require careful navigation. Her interactions with Aunt May, her developing friendship with Harry Osborn despite his ongoing problems, and her growing understanding of Peter's work as a photographer all contribute to a more complete and integrated life for both of them. The engagement also provides Peter with motivation to address some of the practical problems that have been neglected during his period of intense grief. His academic performance, his financial situation, and his career prospects all require attention if he's going to be able to support a wife and potentially a family. Spider-Man's crime-fighting activities begin to regain some of their former purpose and effectiveness as Peter's emotional state improves and his motivation to protect innocent people is reinforced by his desire to create a safer world for Mary Jane and their future together. The mechanical, joyless heroism of his grief period gives way to a renewed sense of mission and responsibility. The relationship between Peter and Mary Jane during their engagement period is characterized by mutual growth and adaptation. She helps him learn to hope and plan for the future again, while he provides her with the emotional depth and stability that her previous relationships lacked. Together, they create something stronger and more sustainable than either could achieve alone. The decision to move forward with marriage despite the risks and uncertainties involved represents an act of faith in the possibility of happiness and the value of human connection. Peter's willingness to open his heart again after such devastating loss demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As they prepare for their wedding and their life together, Peter and Mary Jane carry with them the lessons learned through tragedy and the strength gained through overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. Their love has been tested by crisis and proven strong enough to survive, creating a foundation for whatever challenges the future might bring. The boy who gained spider powers by accident has become a man who understands that heroism requires not just the willingness to fight villains and save innocent people, also the courage to remain open to love and hope despite the inevitable risks and potential losses. The decision to marry Mary Jane represents his commitment to living a full human life, not just a heroic one. The morning of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson's wedding dawns bright and clear, a perfect September day that seems to promise good fortune for the couple who have overcome so much to reach this moment. The small ceremony, held in a modest church in Queens with only close friends and family in attendance, reflects their desire for intimacy and authenticity rather than spectacle or social display. Aunt May, radiant in her role as mother of the groom, has spent weeks preparing for this day, seeing it as the fulfillment of her hopes for Peter's happiness and the continuation of the Parker family legacy. Her joy in watching her nephew find love again after the tragedy of Gwen's death brings tears to her eyes as she helps him adjust his tie and offers final words of wisdom about marriage and commitment. Harry Osborn, serving as Peter's best man despite his ongoing struggles with addiction and grief, represents both the continuity of old friendships and the challenges that the past continues to create in the present. His presence at the wedding is bittersweet as his own problems serve as a reminder of how differently their lives have developed since their college days together. Mary Jane's transformation from the carefree party girl who once avoided serious commitments to a radiant bride ready to pledge her life to another person represents one of the most significant character developments in the entire Spider-Man saga. Her wedding dress, elegant but not ostentatious, reflects her growth into someone who values substance over surface and genuine emotion over empty glamour. The ceremony itself is simple but deeply moving, with traditional vows that carry extra weight given the unconventional circumstances of their courtship and the challenges they have already faced together. When Peter promises to love and protect Mary Jane in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, both of them understand that his heroic responsibilities will test those vows in ways that most couples never experience. The moment when they exchange rings and are pronounced husband and wife marks not just the beginning of their marriage, but Peter's conscious decision to believe in the possibility of happiness despite the dangers and uncertainties that come with being Spider-Man. The kiss they share as the ceremony concludes represents hope triumphing over fear and love conquering the isolation that has marked so much of Peter's heroic career. The reception, held in the church's small community hall, brings together the diverse elements of Peter's life in a way that feels both natural and miraculous. Colleagues from the Daily Bugle mingle with Peter's remaining college friends, while neighbors from Aunt May's street share tables with Mary Jane's modeling and acting acquaintances. Che, Jonah Jameson's presence at the wedding, grudgingly attending as the employer of the man who provides his newspaper with its best Spider-Man photographs, adds a note of irony to the proceedings. His complaints about the food and his dire predictions about the future of marriage in modern society provide comic relief while highlighting the contradictions that define Peter's professional life. The transition from dating to marriage proves to be both easier and more difficult than Peter and Mary Jane anticipated, as they discover that sharing a life completely requires adjustments and compromises that their previous relationship hadn't demanded. The small apartment they rent in Manhattan becomes their first shared domestic space, a modest home that reflects their limited budget but abundant hopes for the future. The practical realities of married life create new challenges for Peter's dual identity, as the need to maintain regular schedules and account for his time becomes more complex when he has a wife who naturally expects to know where he is and what he's doing. Mary Jane's acceptance of Peter's mysterious absences and irregular hours demonstrates both her love for him and her growing understanding that their marriage will be unlike others in ways she can't fully comprehend. The financial pressures that have always shadowed Peter's life become more acute with the addition of Mary Jane's expenses and the goal of building a stable future together. His income from selling photographs to the Daily Bugle, while adequate for a single person living modestly, proves insufficient for a married couple trying to establish themselves in New York City. Mary Jane's own career aspirations and professional commitments create new dynamics in their relationship as she continues pursuing opportunities in modeling and acting while also adapting to the role of supportive wife. Her success in these fields provides additional income that helps stabilize their finances, but it also creates scheduling conflicts and professional demands that must be balanced against their personal relationship. The domestic routines of married life, cooking dinner together, sharing household chores, planning weekend activities, provide Peter with a sense of normalcy and stability that contrasts sharply with the chaos and danger of his Spider-Man activities. These quiet moments of ordinary married life become precious to him, representing the personal happiness that his heroic mission is ultimately designed to protect. But the same domestic intimacy that brings such joy also creates new vulnerabilities and anxieties for Peter. The closer Mary Jane becomes to his daily life, the more difficult it becomes to maintain his secret identity. Her natural curiosity about his work, his interests, and his past threatens to reveal details that could expose his dual identity. The physical intimacy of marriage also creates new challenges for Peter's secret keeping, as unexplained injuries from his Spider-Man activities become harder to hide from someone who shares his bed and sees him in states of undress. His enhanced healing abilities help minimize the evidence of his nocturnal crime fighting, but they can't eliminate all traces of the dangers he faces. During this period of domestic adjustment and marital happiness, Peter acquires what will become one of the most significant and controversial elements of his heroic identity, the black costume that appears to be a technological marvel but conceals a darker truth about its origins and nature. The costume's arrival in Peter's life comes through circumstances that he doesn't fully understand at first, acquired during what he believes to be a simple mission to help other heroes deal with a cosmic-level threat. The suit appears to be everything a superhero could want. It responds to his thoughts, can change its appearance at will, and never seems to wear out or require maintenance. The convenience that the black costume provides for Peter's dual identity is immediately apparent and enormously appealing. No longer does he need to carry his Spider-Man outfit in a bag or worry about hiding it under his street clothes. The costume can assume the appearance of normal clothing when needed, making the transition between his two identities seamless and effortless. Mary Jane's reaction to the new costume is complex and somewhat troubling, as she finds its sleek, dark appearance both attractive and somehow disturbing. Her artist's eye appreciates the costume's dramatic visual impact, but some instinct warns her that there's something unnatural or potentially dangerous about the suit's capabilities. The enhanced abilities that the costume seems to provide, increased strength, unlimited webbing, enhanced durability, make Spider-Man more effective than ever in his crime-fighting activities. The suit anticipates his needs and responds to his subconscious desires, creating a partnership between hero and costume that feels almost telepathic in its precision. But the costume's behavior during Peter's sleep begins to create concerns that gradually escalate into alarm. Mary Jane notices that Peter seems to be moving during the night, sometimes talking in his sleep about fighting criminals or pursuing villains. When she wakes in the morning, Peter appears more tired than he should be, as if he hasn't rested properly despite being in bed all night. The investigation into the costume's true nature, prompted by Peter's growing suspicions about its behavior and its effects on his well-being, reveals a horrifying truth about what he has been wearing. The costume is actually a living symbiotic organism, with its own intelligence, agenda, and need for a host to provide it with sustenance and purpose. Horns. The discovery that the symbiote has been controlling Peter's body during his sleep, using him to fight crime according to its own violent instincts rather than his moral guidelines, represents a profound violation that goes beyond mere physical danger. The creature has been accessing his memories, influencing his emotions, and gradually attempting to merge with him on a psychological level. The process of separating from the symbiote proves to be one of the most difficult and traumatic experiences of Peter's superhero career, requiring him to overcome not just the creature's physical grip on his body, but also its psychological influence on his mind and emotions. The symbiote's resistance to separation makes it clear that it views Peter as more than just a host. It sees him as its property. The method of separation, involving exposure to intense sonic vibrations that cause the symbiote excruciating pain, forces Peter to essentially torture the creature in order to free himself from its control. The moral implications of this action trouble him deeply, as he recognizes that the symbiote, whatever its flaws and dangerous tendencies, is a living being capable of suffering. Mary Jane's role in helping Peter break free from the symbiote's influence proves crucial to his ultimate success. Her love and emotional support provide him with psychological anchors that the creature cannot replicate or replace, giving him the strength to resist the symbiote's attempts to convince him that they belong together permanently. The withdrawal process that follows Peter's separation from the symbiote creates symptoms similar to those experienced by people overcoming drug addiction. He experiences physical weakness, emotional instability, and a persistent sense that something essential is missing from his life. The costume had become more than just clothing, it had become part of his identity. The return to his traditional red and blue costume feels strange and limiting after the convenience and enhanced capabilities provided by the symbiote. Peter must readjust to the practical difficulties of maintaining his secret identity without the black suit's shape-changing abilities, while also dealing with the psychological aftermath of his experience with the alien creature. The knowledge that the symbiote remains somewhere in the city, presumably seeking a new host, creates ongoing anxiety for Peter about the potential dangers it might create for innocent people. His sense of responsibility extends to feeling accountable for any crimes or violence that the creature commits after their separation. The symbiotes bonding with Eddie Brock, a disgraced journalist whose career was destroyed by Spider-Man's exposure of his fraudulent reporting, creates one of Peter's most dangerous and personally motivated enemies. The combination of Brock's hatred for Spider-Man and the symbiote's intimate knowledge of Peter's abilities and psychology produces a villain uniquely equipped to torment and potentially destroy the wall crawler. Eddie Brock's background as a journalist gives him skills and resources that most of Spider-Man's enemies lack, including the ability to investigate Peter's personal life and potentially discover his secret identity through methods that go beyond simple physical stalking. His professional training in research and information gathering makes him a more sophisticated threat than typical street-level criminals. The symbiote's influence on Brock amplifies his existing psychological problems and removes the inhibitions that previously prevented him from acting on his darker impulses. The creature's own predatory nature merges with Brock's desire for revenge, creating a hybrid personality that is both more intelligent and more ruthless than either component would be alone. Venom's first attack on Peter, occurring in the supposed safety of his own home, represents a violation of the boundaries between his heroic and personal identities that is both shocking and terrifying. The creature's ability to bypass his spider sense due to its previous bonding with him makes it nearly impossible for Peter to detect and defend against its approaches. The psychological warfare that Venom employs goes beyond simple physical threats, as the creature uses its knowledge of Peter's memories, fears, and relationships to create maximum emotional damage. The symbiote's access to Peter's most private thoughts and experiences during their bonding period provides it with ammunition for psychological attacks that cut deeper than any physical assault. Mary Jane's encounter with Venom, which occurs when she discovers the creature in their apartment, represents one of the most traumatic experiences of her marriage to Peter. The sight of something that looks like her husband's costume transformed into a monstrous predator creates fears and anxieties that affect her sense of safety and security for months afterward. The various crises and challenges that Peter and Mary Jane face during their early married years test their relationship in ways that most couples never experience, forcing them to develop communication skills and coping mechanisms that go far beyond those required for normal marital problems. The constant threat of danger from Peter's enemies creates a baseline level of stress that affects every aspect of their life together. Mary Jane's gradual understanding of the true extent of the dangers that surround her husband comes not through revelation or explanation, but through experience and observation. Each villain attack, each mysterious injury, each unexplained absence adds to her growing comprehension of the risks that Peter faces and the sacrifices that their marriage requires. The financial pressures that continue to challenge their household economics are compounded by the costs associated with Peter's heroic activities, replacement costumes, medical expenses that can't be explained to insurance companies, and the career limitations created by his unpredictable schedule. The practical difficulties of being married to a superhero extend far beyond the obvious dangers. Peter's growing realization that his secret identity creates barriers to complete intimacy with his wife generates guilt and frustration that affect his emotional well-being and his effectiveness as both a husband and a hero. The knowledge that Mary Jane loves him without knowing the full truth about his life makes him feel both grateful and deceptive. The support system that Peter and Mary Jane developed during this period, including their relationships with Aunt May, their friendships with other couples, and their professional connections, becomes essential to their ability to maintain their marriage despite the unique pressures they face. The people who care about them provide stability and normalcy that balance the chaos of superhero life. The evolution of their relationship from romantic love to mature partnership occurs through their shared experiences of crisis and recovery, challenge and triumph. Each difficulty they overcome together strengthens their bond and increases their confidence in their ability to face whatever challenges the future might bring. As Peter and Mary Jane's marriage matures and stabilizes, both of them grow into fuller understanding of what it means to be partners in a life dedicated to heroism and service to others. Mary Jane's role evolves from that of supportive wife to active participant in Peter's mission, as she develops skills and insights that make her an invaluable ally in his work as Spider-Man. Peter's understanding of heroism expands beyond the individual courage and moral commitment that characterized his early career to include the recognition that even heroes need support systems and personal relationships to sustain them through the challenges they face. His marriage to Mary Jane makes him not just a better person but a more effective hero. The balance that they achieve between personal happiness and heroic responsibility becomes a model for how extraordinary individuals can maintain human connections while dedicating their lives to serving others. Their marriage demonstrates that love and duty need not be mutually exclusive but can instead reinforce and strengthen each other. The home that Peter and Mary Jane create together becomes a sanctuary where the weight of responsibility can be temporarily set aside and the simple joys of human connection can be celebrated. Their apartment represents more than just a place to live. It becomes a symbol of hope and normalcy in a world often dominated by conflict and crisis. The mutual growth and development that both Peter and Mary Jane experience through their marriage prepares them for the even greater challenges that lie ahead, including threats that will test not just their courage and commitment, but their very understanding of what it means to be human in a world where the boundaries between hero and ordinary person are constantly being redefined. As they face their future together, Peter and Mary Jane carry with them the lessons learned through love, loss, and the gradual recognition that the most important battles are often fought not against costumed villains or cosmic threats, but within the human heart, where the choice between hope and despair is made anew each day. The boy who gained spider powers by accident has become a man who understands that true strength comes not from enhanced abilities or moral righteousness, but from the willingness to remain open to love and committed to growth, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. His marriage to Mary Jane represents not the end of his heroic journey, but its transformation into something richer, more complex, and ultimately more human. The story that will come to be known as Kraven's Last Hunt begins not with action or violence, but with the quiet desperation of a man who has spent his entire life in pursuit of a goal that has ultimately proven meaningless. Sergei Kravenov, known to the world as Kraven the Hunter, sits in his study surrounded by the trophies of a lifetime spent tracking and killing the most dangerous animals on Earth, and realizes that none of it has brought him the satisfaction or sense of completion he sought. For years, Kraven has considered Spider-Man to be his greatest quarry, the one prey that has consistently eluded his skills and made a mockery of his reputation as the world's greatest hunter. Each defeat at the hands of the wall crawler has eaten away at his pride and his sense of identity, transforming what began as professional ambition into personal obsession and ultimately into a kind of madness. The plan that Kraven develops to finally achieve his victory over Spider-Man is unlike any previous scheme he has employed. Rather than simply defeating his enemy in combat, he intends to prove his superiority by becoming Spider-Man, not just wearing the costume but actually taking over the hero's role and demonstrating that he can perform Spider-Man's duties more effectively than Spider-Man himself. The psychological profile that Kraven has developed of his prey over years of study and conflict has given him insights into Spider-Man's personality and motivations that go far beyond what most villains understand about their enemies. He knows that Peter Parker values the lives of innocent people above his own safety, that he struggles with guilt and self-doubt, and that he can be manipulated through threats to the people he cares about. The trap that Kraven sets for Spider-Man is elegantly simple in its conception and devastating in its execution. Using his knowledge of the hero's patrol patterns and his understanding of Peter's psychological makeup, he creates a situation where Spider-Man must respond to what appears to be a threat to innocent civilians, walking directly into an ambush that has been months in the planning. The confrontation that follows is unlike any previous battle between the two opponents, because Kraven is not fighting to escape or to achieve some criminal goal. He is fighting to kill, with every resource at his disposal, and with the desperate fury of someone who sees this as his last chance to prove his worth as a hunter and as a man. The moment when Craven's rifle shot takes down Spider-Man marks not just a victory for the hunter, but the beginning of a psychological horror story that will haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. The sight of the supposedly invincible wall crawler falling motionless to the ground represents a fundamental shift in the power dynamics that have defined their relationship and challenges the basic assumptions about heroism and mortality that underpin the Spider-Man mythology. Craven's decision to bury Spider-Man while he is still alive, though unconscious, reflects both the hunter's desire to savor his victory and his deep understanding of the psychological impact that this method of disposal will have on his prey. The experience of waking up in a coffin, surrounded by earth and darkness, represents a form of torture that goes beyond mere physical suffering to attack the victim's sanity and will to survive. The 2 weeks that Peter spends buried underground become a test of everything that defines his character: his physical resilience, his mental strength, his moral commitment, and his love for the people who depend on him. The grave becomes a crucible where all of his heroic qualities are refined and intensified through suffering and isolation. Mary Jane's experience during Peter's disappearance creates its own kind of horror as she faces the possibility that her husband is dead while being unable to explain her fears or seek comfort from people who don't know his secret identity. Her grief is complicated by uncertainty. She doesn't know whether to mourn Peter's death or hope for his return, and she can't share her anguish with anyone who would truly understand it. The hallucinations and visions that Peter experiences while buried alive reflect both the physical effects of oxygen deprivation and the psychological pressure of confronting his own mortality. The conversations he has with Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, and other figures from his past represent his mind's attempt to process the meaning of his life and the value of his heroic mission. The gradual realization that he is not actually dead, that his enhanced physiology has allowed him to survive in conditions that would kill an ordinary person, provides Peter with the motivation he needs to begin the seemingly impossible task of digging his way out of his own grave. Haunte, Enuminke. The physical effort required is enormous, but the psychological challenge is even greater. While Peter struggles to survive in his underground prison, Craven begins the most audacious phase of his plan, assuming the identity of Spider-Man and attempting to prove that he can be a better hero than the original. The psychological complexity of this scheme reveals depths to Craven's character that go beyond simple villainy, showing a man who genuinely believes that his predatory instincts and ruthless methods make him superior to Peter's moral constraints. Craven's version of Spider-Man is more violent and decisive than the original, reflecting his belief that heroes should be willing to kill their enemies rather than simply defeating and capturing them. His actions as the false Spider-Man create a trail of dead criminals and thoroughly intimidated survivors who spread word throughout the underworld that something fundamental has changed about the wall crawler's methods. The costume that Craven wears is a perfect replica of Spider-Man's outfit, but the behavior of the person inside it is dramatically different. Where Peter Parker's Spider-Man is characterized by wisecracks, acrobatic grace, and careful attention to minimizing collateral damage, Craven's version is grim, methodical, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of criminals. Mary Jane's encounter with the false Spider-Man represents one of the most disturbing moments in the entire storyline, as she realizes that someone wearing her husband's costume is not her husband. The violation of Spider-Man's identity and the psychological impact of seeing someone else inhabiting Peter's heroic persona creates trauma that affects her long after the crisis is resolved. The reaction of the criminal underworld to this new, more violent Spider-Man reveals how much Peter's usual restraint and moral guidelines have shaped his reputation among the people he fights. Criminals who once viewed him as a nuisance or obstacle now see him as a genuine threat to their lives, creating a level of fear and respect that the original Spider-Man never inspired. Jonah Jameson's response to the reports of Spider-Man killing criminals creates one of the few moments of genuine moral clarity in the publisher's long campaign against the wall crawler. Despite his years of portraying Spider-Man as a menace, Jameson instinctively recognizes that a hero who kills is no hero at all, and his editorials during this period actually defend the real Spider-Man's methods and principles. Peter's emergence from his grave after 2 weeks of burial and the superhuman effort required to dig his way to the surface represents not just a physical resurrection but a spiritual transformation that affects every aspect of his understanding of heroism and mortality. Uri Suyu Gemad, the call of Nay Si and to mortality, the experience of dying and returning to life, or at least believing that he has died and returned, gives him a perspective on his heroic mission that he has never possessed before. The physical condition in which Peter emerges from his grave reflects the toll that his underground imprisonment has taken on his body and mind. He is weakened, disoriented, and psychologically traumatized by his experience, but he is also driven by a fury and determination that go beyond his usual heroic motivations. The discovery that someone has been impersonating him as Spider-Man during his absence adds another layer of violation to Peter's trauma, as he realizes that his identity and reputation have been stolen and corrupted by his enemy. The knowledge that people have died at the hands of the false Spider-Man creates guilt and responsibility that he must carry despite having been powerless to prevent it. The confrontation between the real Spider-Man and Kraven when Peter finally tracks down his tormentor represents a battle not just between hero and villain, but between two fundamentally different philosophies of justice and survival. Peter's rage at what has been done to him and to his identity threatens to override the moral constraints that have always defined his heroic mission. Kraven's reaction to Spider-Man's return from the dead is complex and unexpected, combining triumph at having achieved his goal of killing his greatest enemy with disappointment that his victory was not as permanent as he had hoped. The hunter's psychology has been built around the pursuit of the ultimate quarry, and Spider-Man's resurrection robs him of the finality that he craved. The revelation of Kraven's ultimate plan, not just to defeat Spider-Man but to die by his own hand after proving his superiority, transforms the conflict from a simple battle between good and evil into a meditation on honor, purpose, and the meaning of victory. Kraven's suicide, accomplished after he has demonstrated his ability to be a better Spider-Man, represents his recognition that he has achieved everything he set out to accomplish. Peter's inability to prevent Kraven's death, despite his heroic instincts and his commitment to preserving life, creates another layer of guilt and trauma that will affect his understanding of heroism for years to come. The knowledge that his enemy chose death rather than continue living after achieving his greatest victory challenges Peter's assumptions about the value of life and the nature of human motivation. The weeks and months following Kraven's last hunt mark one of the most psychologically difficult periods in Peter Parker's heroic career, as he struggles to process the trauma of his burial and resurrection, while dealing with the ongoing effects of having his identity stolen and corrupted. The experience has shaken his confidence in his own invulnerability and forced him to confront his own mortality in ways that fundamentally change his approach to heroism. Mary Jane's role in helping Peter recover from his trauma becomes even more crucial than her support during his grief over Gwen Stacy's death, as she provides the emotional stability and unconditional love that allow him to gradually rebuild his sense of self and purpose. This experience has shaken his confidence in his own invulnerability and forced him to confront his own mortality in ways that fundamentally change his approach to heroism. Her own trauma from the encounter with the false Spider-Man creates a shared experience of violation that brings them closer together, while also highlighting the costs of Peter's double life. The nightmares and flashbacks that plague Peter during his recovery reflect not just the physical trauma of his burial, but the psychological impact of having his heroic identity stolen and perverted by his enemy. The knowledge that people died at the hands of someone wearing his costume creates guilt and responsibility that go beyond the normal boundaries of heroic obligation. The gradual return to his normal crime-fighting activities requires Peter to overcome not just his physical weakness from his ordeal, but also his shaken confidence in his ability to protect innocent people and maintain the moral standards that define his heroic mission. Each victory helps restore his faith in himself, while each failure reinforces his doubts and fears. The relationship between Peter and Mary Jane deepens through their shared experience of trauma and recovery, as both of them learn to communicate more openly about their fears, needs, and hopes for the future. The crisis has stripped away many of the pretenses and barriers that previously limited their intimacy, creating a foundation for a stronger and more honest partnership. The period following Kraven's last hunt sees the emergence of new enemies and challenges that test Spider-Man's recovering confidence and force him to adapt his methods and strategies to deal with threats that are unlike anything he has faced before. These new villains often represent different aspects of modern urban life and the changing nature of crime in an increasingly complex world. The Hobgoblin, a mysterious figure who has acquired some of the Green Goblin's equipment and methods but possesses a different psychology and motivation, represents the ongoing threat posed by Norman Osborn's legacy even after his death. The new villain's identity remains hidden behind multiple layers of deception and misdirection, creating a mystery that challenges Spider-Man's detective skills as much as his physical abilities. Venom's continued presence in New York City creates ongoing anxiety for Peter, as Eddie Brock's hatred and the symbiote's intimate knowledge of Peter's abilities make them one of the most dangerous and persistent threats he faces. Each encounter with Venom becomes a reminder of Peter's past mistakes and the continuing consequences of his decision to bond with the alien costume. The emergence of Carnage, an offspring of the Venom symbiote bonded with the serial killer Cletus Cassidy, represents a threat so dangerous that it forces Spider-Man to work with his enemy Venom in an uneasy alliance. The psychological horror of facing a villain who kills purely for pleasure, combined with the practical challenges of fighting someone with powers similar to his own, pushes Peter to his limits both physically and morally. The various street-level criminals, mob bosses and corrupt officials who populate Spider-Man's rogues gallery during this period reflect the gritty realities of urban crime and the challenges of maintaining law and order in a city as large and complex as New York. These enemies may lack the exotic powers of supervillains, but they often prove more difficult to defeat permanently because they represent systemic problems rather than individual threats. Harry Osborn's gradual discovery of his father's secret identity as the Green Goblin, combined with his ongoing struggles with addiction and mental health issues, creates one of the most tragic and personal conflicts in Peter Parker's life. The revelation that his best friend's father was responsible for Gwen Stacy's death forces Harry to choose between loyalty to his family's memory and his friendship with Peter. The psychological pressure of learning about his father's criminal activities and the circumstances of his death gradually overwhelms Harry's already fragile mental state, leading him to embrace the Green Goblin identity as both a way of honoring his father's memory and expressing his own rage and resentment towards Spider-Man. Harry's transformation into the new Green Goblin is particularly heartbreaking because Peter knows the good person that Harry was before his psychological breakdown, and he continues to hope that his friend can be saved even as Harry becomes increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The battles between Spider-Man and the new Green Goblin are complicated by Peter's reluctance to seriously harm someone who was once his closest friend, while Harry's intimate knowledge of Peter's personal life and relationships makes him capable of attacks that go far beyond simple physical violence. The chemical enhancement process that gives Harry his Green Goblin powers also accelerates his mental deterioration, creating a tragic situation where each use of his abilities brings him closer to complete madness while also making him more dangerous to the people around him. The involvement of Harry's wife Liz and their son Norman in the conflict adds another layer of complexity and emotional weight to the situation, as Peter must balance his desire to save his friend against his responsibility to protect innocent family members who are caught in the crossfire of their battle. The final confrontation between Peter Parker and Harry Osborn unfolds not as a typical superhero battle, but as a desperate attempt by one friend to save another from self-destruction. Harry's plan to kill both himself and Peter in a final gesture of revenge and despair represents the ultimate expression of his psychological breakdown and his inability to cope with the legacy of his father's crimes. The location of their final battle, a warehouse rigged with explosives that will destroy everyone inside, reflects Harry's desire to end the cycle of violence and hatred that has defined the Osborn family's relationship with Spider-Man. His willingness to sacrifice his own life to achieve his revenge demonstrates the complete collapse of his moral reasoning and his descent into the same kind of madness that claimed his father. Peter's attempts to reason with Harry during their final confrontation reveal the depth of his love and loyalty for his friend, even in the face of Harry's attempts to kill him. The conversation that takes place while they fight among the explosives becomes a kind of therapy session, as Peter tries to reach the part of Harry that remembers their friendship and shared experiences. The moment when Harry's sanity briefly returns, allowing him to see the horror of what he has planned and the innocent lives that would be lost in his revenge scheme, provides a glimpse of the person he used to be and the friend that Peter remembers. This moment of clarity gives Harry the strength to save the people he had planned to destroy, even at the cost of his own life. Harry's death, caused by the physical toll that the Green Goblin formula has taken on his body rather than by violence or explosion, occurs in Peter's arms as they escape from the warehouse together. His final words, acknowledging their friendship and asking Peter to look after his family, provide some measure of peace and closure to their tragic relationship. The funeral that follows Harry's death brings together all of the people whose lives he touched during his brief time on Earth, creating a memorial that celebrates the good person he was rather than the villain he became in his final days. Peter's eulogy for his friend reflects both his grief at losing someone he loved and his guilt at being unable to save Harry from the demons that ultimately destroyed him. The period following Harry Osborn's death requires Peter to once again confront the costs of his heroic mission and the ways that his double life affects the people closest to him. The loss of his oldest friend, under circumstances that make Peter partially responsible for the tragedy, creates guilt and self-doubt that threaten to undermine his commitment to continuing as Spider-Man. Mary Jane's support during this difficult time becomes even more crucial, as she helps Peter process his grief, while also dealing with her own sadness at losing someone who had been part of their extended family. Her understanding of Peter's complex feelings about Harry's death, combining love, guilt, anger, and regret, allows her to provide the kind of emotional support that he needs to continue functioning. The responsibility that Peter accepts for Harry's son Norman, honoring his promise to his dying friend, creates new challenges and obligations that force him to think about his role not just as a hero but as a mentor and father figure. The need to provide positive guidance for a child who carries the Osborn family legacy adds another dimension to Peter's understanding of responsibility and commitment. The professional and personal relationships that Peter maintains with the other people who were part of Harry's life, Liz Allen, Norman's mother, and various business associates from Oscorp Industries, require careful navigation as Peter tries to honor his friend's memory while protecting his own secret identity. The ongoing presence of Green Goblin equipment and research materials hidden in various Osborn properties creates potential threats that Peter must monitor and contain to prevent other disturbed individuals from following in Norman and Harry's footsteps. The legacy of the Green Goblin identity becomes a continuing responsibility that extends far beyond the deaths of its previous holders. The lessons learned through the tragedy of Harry's transformation and death influence Peter's approach to dealing with other enemies who might be saved rather than simply defeated. The knowledge that even his closest friend could become his enemy under the right circumstances makes Peter more aware of the factors that can drive good people to evil acts. During this period of grief and adjustment, Peter faces one of the most complex and psychologically challenging experiences of his entire career when the Clone Saga returns with revelations that threaten to destroy his understanding of his own identity and place in the world. The reappearance of Ben Reilly, the clone who was thought to have died years earlier, creates questions about identity, authenticity, and the nature of heroism that go to the very core of Peter's self-concept. Ben Reilly's survival and his development into a hero in his own right during the years since his apparent death challenges Peter's assumptions about uniqueness and his exclusive claim to the Spider-Man identity. The clone has not only survived but has thrived, developing his own relationships, his own moral code, and his own heroic mission that parallels but differs from Peter's path. The genetic testing that seems to prove that Ben is the original Peter Parker and that Peter himself is the clone creates an existential crisis that threatens to destroy Peter's sense of self and his understanding of his place in the world. If he is not the real Peter Parker, what gives him the right to the memories, relationships, and responsibilities that have defined his life? The emotional impact of potentially being the clone rather than the original affects not just Peter, but also Mary Jane, who must confront the possibility that the man she married might not be the person she thought he was. The questions about identity and authenticity that arise from the clone revelation challenge the foundation of their relationship and their understanding of what makes a person real. The decision that Peter makes to step aside and allow Ben to take over as Spider-Man based on the belief that Ben is the real Peter Parker represents one of the most selfless acts of his career. His willingness to give up his heroic identity for the sake of what he believes to be right demonstrates the depth of his moral character and his commitment to principles over personal desires. The period during which Ben Reilly serves as Spider-Man while Peter attempts to build a normal life with Mary Jane provides both characters with opportunities to explore different aspects of their identities and to discover what truly defines them as individuals. The experience teaches them that heroism is not dependent on genetic authenticity, but on the choices that people make and the values they embrace. The eventual revelation that the genetic testing was falsified and that Peter is indeed the original creates relief, but also raises questions about the nature of identity and the meaning of authenticity. The knowledge that both Peter and Ben are real people with valid claims to existence and heroic purpose demonstrates that the question of who is the real Spider-Man is less important than the question of who chooses to live up to the Spider-Man ideal. Ben Reilly's sacrifice to save Peter and Mary Jane from the machinations of the real villain behind the clone saga provides a resolution that is both tragic and uplifting. His death proves that he was willing to give his life for others regardless of questions about his genetic origins, demonstrating that heroism is measured by actions rather than by DNA. The joy that Peter and Mary Jane experience when they discover that she is pregnant represents a new chapter in their marriage and their hopes for the future, creating the possibility that Peter's heroic legacy might continue through a child who could grow up knowing both the responsibilities and the rewards of using power in service of others. The pregnancy brings both excitement and anxiety as Peter and Mary Jane contemplate the challenges of raising a child while maintaining his secret identity and continuing his work as Spider-Man. The knowledge that their child will inherit both the benefits and the burdens of being part of the Parker family legacy creates complex feelings about the future they are creating. Mary Jane's experience during her pregnancy is complicated by the ongoing dangers and stresses that come with being married to Spider-Man, as she must deal with morning sickness and hormonal changes while also coping with the constant anxiety about Peter's safety and the potential threats to their growing family. The preparations that Peter and Mary Jane make for their child's arrival reflect their hopes and dreams for a future that includes both heroic responsibilities and family happiness. The nursery they create, the names they consider, and the plans they make all represent their faith in the possibility of building a normal family life despite the extraordinary circumstances of their existence. The tragic loss of their child, whether through miscarriage, stillbirth, or the machinations of their enemies, represents one of the most devastating experiences that Peter and Mary Jane face as a couple. The grief that follows this loss tests their marriage and their individual strength in ways that even their previous tragedies did not. The period of mourning that follows the loss of their expected child requires Peter and Mary Jane to support each other through grief while also maintaining their other responsibilities and relationships. The private nature of their loss, complicated by Peter's secret identity, makes it difficult for them to seek the kind of support and understanding that other couples might receive from their communities. The decision about whether to try again for another child becomes a complex negotiation between hope and fear, as both Peter and Mary Jane must weigh their desire for a family against the risks and responsibilities that define their life together. The question of whether it is fair to bring a child into a world where one parent regularly risks his life fighting dangerous criminals becomes a source of ongoing discussion and soul-searching. As Peter and Mary Jane work through their grief and begin to rebuild their hopes for the future, they carry with them the lessons learned through loss and the strengthened bond that comes from surviving tragedy together. Their marriage has been tested by some of the most difficult experiences that any couple can face, and they have emerged stronger and more committed to each other and to their shared mission of making the world a better place. The boy who gained spider powers by accident has become a man who understands that heroism is not just about fighting villains and saving innocent people, but also about finding the strength to continue hoping and loving despite the inevitable losses and disappointments that life brings. His journey through marriage, friendship, tragedy, and renewal has prepared him for whatever challenges lie ahead, secure in the knowledge that he does not face them alone. As the calendar turns from the 20th to the 21st century, Peter Parker finds himself entering a new phase of his life and his heroic career. The boy who was bitten by a radioactive spider in 1962 has become a man approaching his 40s, with decades of experience as Spider-Man and a lifetime of memories that span some of the most significant moments in superhero history. The world that Peter protects has changed dramatically since his early days as a hero. New York City itself has evolved, with gleaming towers of glass and steel rising alongside the older architecture that witnessed his first adventures. Technology has advanced in ways that would have seemed like science fiction during his high school years, creating new opportunities for both heroes and villains while also presenting challenges that require adaptation and growth. Peter's approach to heroism has matured along with his understanding of the world and his place in it. The impulsive teenager who once used his powers primarily to assuage his guilt over Uncle Ben's death has become a seasoned hero who understands the complex relationships between individual action and systemic change, between personal responsibility and community obligation. The financial struggles that once dominated Peter's life have eased somewhat as his career as a freelance photographer has evolved into other opportunities that better utilize his intelligence and education. His work now encompasses not just capturing images of Spider-Man's adventures, but also scientific consulting, technical writing, and other professional activities that provide more stable income for his family. Mary Jane's career has also evolved during this period as she has moved beyond modeling and acting to explore opportunities in business, fashion design, and other fields that utilize her creativity and intelligence. Her success in these endeavors has contributed to their household's financial stability while also providing her with professional fulfillment that complements rather than competes with her role as Peter's wife and partner. The relationship between Peter and Mary Jane has deepened into the kind of mature partnership that can only develop through years of shared experiences, mutual support, and the gradual building of trust and understanding. They have learned to communicate more effectively about their needs, fears, and hopes, creating a foundation that can support them through whatever challenges the future might bring. One of the most significant developments in Peter's life during this period is his decision to become a teacher, using his scientific knowledge and his understanding of young people to help educate the next generation. His work at Midtown High School, the same institution where he was once a student, creates a sense of symmetry and completion that reflects his growth from awkward teenager to confident adult. The irony of Peter Parker teaching at the school where he was once bullied and overlooked is not lost on him, as he finds himself in the position of protecting and encouraging students who remind him of his younger self. His experiences as Spider-Man have given him insights into courage, responsibility, and moral development that prove invaluable in his work with teenagers who are struggling to find their place in the world. Peter's approach to teaching reflects his belief that science is not just about facts and formulas, but about understanding the world and our place in it. His classes become explorations of how scientific principles apply to everyday life and how knowledge can be used to solve problems and help others. The relationships that Peter develops with his students create new dimensions to his understanding of responsibility and mentorship. Some of these young people face challenges that echo his own adolescent experiences, while others struggle with issues that he can only understand through empathy and careful listening. The balancing act between his teaching responsibilities and his work as Spider-Man creates new scheduling challenges and logistical complications, but it also provides him with a sense of purpose and accomplishment that goes beyond his heroic activities. The knowledge that he is helping to shape young minds and encouraging the next generation of scientists and leaders gives meaning to his daily work that complements his crime-fighting mission. The respect that Peter earns from his colleagues and students as a teacher provides him with professional satisfaction and social connections that have been missing from much of his adult life. The opportunity to be known and appreciated for his intelligence and dedication rather than being misunderstood or criticized offers a welcome contrast to the public reaction to Spider-Man. The criminal landscape that Spider-Man faces in the new millennium reflects the changing nature of crime and the evolving challenges of maintaining law and order in an increasingly complex world. New villains emerge who utilize advanced technology, global connections, and sophisticated strategies that require Spider-Man to adapt his methods and expand his understanding of how modern crime operates. Mr. Negative represents a new type of enemy, one whose criminal activities are intertwined with legitimate business operations and charitable work. The dual nature of Martin Li's identity creates moral complexities that challenge Spider-Man's usual approach to dealing with villains, as the same person who commits terrible crimes also runs programs that help the homeless and disadvantaged. The technology-based threats that emerge during this period require Spider-Man to upgrade his own equipment and methods to remain effective against enemies who can hack computer systems, manipulate electronic devices, and use digital networks to coordinate their criminal activities. The simple mechanical web shooters of his early career are supplemented by more sophisticated devices that can interface with modern technology. The international scope of some of the criminal organizations that Spider-Man encounters forces him to think beyond the boundaries of New York City and consider how his actions fit into global patterns of crime and justice. Hall to Mumentars, so intentionally viomentars. The realization that some of his enemies have connections that span continents challenges his understanding of what it means to be a neighborhood hero. The emergence of copycat heroes and villains who adopt spider-themed identities creates questions about legacy, inspiration, and the responsibility that comes with being a symbol rather than just an individual. Spider-Man's influence on other people's choices to embrace heroism or villainy becomes another factor that he must consider in his decision-making. Peter's invitation to join the Avengers represents both recognition of his heroic achievements and a new phase in his career that brings both opportunities and challenges. The transition from solo hero to team member requires adjustments in his fighting style, his decision-making process, and his understanding of how individual heroism fits into larger organizational structures. The financial support that comes with Avengers membership provides Peter and Mary Jane with economic security that they have never previously enjoyed, allowing them to move to better accommodations and reducing the stress that financial uncertainty has created throughout their marriage. The knowledge that Peter has access to advanced medical care, legal support, and other resources gives Mary Jane some peace of mind about the risks associated with his heroic activities. The relationships that Peter develops with other Avengers create a support network of people who understand the challenges and responsibilities of superhero life in ways that civilian friends and family members cannot. The opportunity to discuss strategy, share experiences, and learn from other heroes provides Peter with professional development opportunities that enhance his effectiveness as Spider-Man. The public recognition that comes with Avengers membership changes the way that Spider-Man is perceived by the media, law enforcement, and the general public. The endorsement implied by his inclusion in the team helps counteract some of the negative publicity that Jonah Jameson and other critics have generated over the years. The global scope of many Avengers missions exposes Peter to threats and challenges that go far beyond street-level crime, requiring him to develop new skills and strategies for dealing with cosmic-level dangers, magical threats, and other exotic problems that his neighborhood patrol experience hasn't prepared him for. The leadership responsibilities that Peter gradually assumes within the team reflect his growth as a hero and his development of the kind of wisdom and judgment that come from years of experience making difficult decisions under pressure. His ability to inspire and coordinate other heroes becomes one of his most valuable contributions to the team's success. The superhero registration crisis that erupts during this period creates one of the most challenging moral and political situations that Peter Parker has ever faced, forcing him to choose between competing loyalties and conflicting principles while also dealing with threats to his family's safety and his secret identity. The initial arguments in favor of superhero registration appeal to Peter's sense of responsibility and his belief in accountability, as they seem to offer a way to ensure that people with extraordinary powers are held to appropriate standards and oversight. These initial arguments in favor of superhero registration appeal to Peter's sense of responsibility and his belief in accountability. Servant Jerry, spot no fizz no fip, so when to myofic. His respect for Tony Stark and his desire to be on the right side of a complex issue lead him to initially support the registration initiative. The decision to reveal his secret identity as part of the pro-registration publicity campaign represents one of the most significant moments in Peter's entire career, ending decades of careful secret-keeping and fundamentally changing his relationship with the world around him. The press conference where he unmasks himself creates ripple effects that will influence every aspect of his life for years to come. The immediate consequences of Peter's identity revelation include threats to Aunt May's safety, complications in his teaching career, and changes in his relationships with friends, colleagues, and neighbors who must now reconcile their knowledge of Peter Parker the teacher with Peter Parker the superhero. The gradual realization that the registration program is being implemented in ways that violate his moral principles and endanger innocent people forces Peter to reconsider his position and ultimately to switch sides in the conflict. The decision to oppose the registration initiative after initially supporting it requires him to admit error and accept the consequences of his previous choices. The attack on Aunt May that results from Peter's decision to oppose the registration program creates one of the most personally devastating consequences of his heroic career, as the woman who raised him becomes a victim of the political conflicts that his activities have generated. The shooting of Aunt May by a sniper working for the Kingpin represents the ultimate violation of the boundaries that Peter has tried to maintain between his heroic activities and his personal life. The knowledge that his aunt is dying because of choices he made as Spider-Man creates guilt and anguish that threaten to destroy his ability to function as either a hero or a human being. The medical crisis that follows the shooting forces Peter to confront the limitations of both his superhero abilities and his financial resources, as even the most advanced medical care available cannot guarantee Aunt May's recovery. The helplessness he feels while watching the woman who raised him fight for her life represents a different kind of challenge than anything he has faced in his heroic career. The desperate search for ways to save Aunt May's life leads Peter to explore options that would normally be unthinkable, including potential deals with supernatural entities and other morally questionable arrangements. The willingness to consider sacrificing his own happiness for Aunt May's life demonstrates the depth of his love for her and his sense of obligation for her suffering. The support that Peter receives from other heroes, friends, and even some former enemies during this crisis provides him with evidence of the positive impact that his heroic career has had on the people around him. The knowledge that others are willing to help him in his time of need offers some comfort during an otherwise devastating period. Mary Jane's role in supporting Peter through this crisis while also dealing with her own grief and fear creates additional strain on their marriage, as both of them struggle to maintain hope while preparing for the possibility of losing someone who is essential to their family structure. The medical vigil that Peter maintains at Aunt May's bedside provides him with time for reflection on their relationship and the ways that her influence has shaped his development as both a person and a hero. The conversations he has with her during her moments of consciousness become opportunities to express gratitude and love that he might not otherwise have found ways to communicate. The appearance of Mephisto and his offer to save Aunt May's life in exchange for Peter and Mary Jane's marriage represents one of the most morally complex and emotionally devastating choices that Peter has ever faced. The supernatural entity's proposal forces him to choose between his love for his wife and his responsibility to the woman who raised him. The terms of Mephisto's deal are designed to cause maximum psychological damage to both Peter and Mary Jane, as they must not only sacrifice their marriage but also their memories of that marriage, ensuring that they will live with a sense of incompleteness and loss without understanding its source. The 24-hour period that Peter and Mary Jane have to consider the deal and spend their final day together as husband and wife becomes a meditation on love, sacrifice, and the nature of happiness. Their conversations during this time explore the depth of their relationship and their willingness to sacrifice their own happiness for the well-being of others. Mary Jane's decision to accept the deal, despite Peter's reluctance, reflects her understanding of how much Aunt May means to him and her recognition that he would never be able to forgive himself if he allowed his aunt to die when he had the power to save her. Her sacrifice demonstrates the selfless love that has defined their relationship throughout their marriage. The execution of the deal and the erasure of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage from history creates a new status quo that affects not only their personal relationship but also the entire structure of Peter's life and support system. The loss of the partnership that has sustained him through so many challenges leaves him isolated in ways that he doesn't fully understand. The aftermath of the deal leaves both Peter and Mary Jane with a sense of emptiness and longing that they cannot explain, as their unconscious minds retain some memory of what they have lost, even as their conscious awareness has been altered. The tragedy of their situation is compounded by their inability to understand why they feel so incomplete. The new status quo that emerges after the erasure of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage creates opportunities for fresh beginnings and new storytelling possibilities, but it also represents a profound loss that affects every aspect of Peter's life and relationships. The young man who once again finds himself single and living with his aunt must rebuild his life while carrying the unconscious burden of everything he has forgotten. Peter's return to a more traditional superhero lifestyle, with renewed focus on street-level crime fighting and personal responsibility, reflects both the reset of his personal circumstances and his continued commitment to using his powers in service of others. The familiar patterns of his early heroic career provide stability during a period of unconscious grief and adjustment. The new relationships and romantic possibilities that enter Peter's life during this period offer hope for future happiness while also serving as reminders of what he has lost without understanding what it was. The connections he forms with other people are inevitably compared to the unconscious memory of the perfect partnership he once shared with Mary Jane. Aunt May's recovery and her return to active participation in Peter's life provides him with the support and guidance that he needs during this period of unconscious transition. Her presence in his daily life offers continuity and stability that help anchor him while he adapts to his altered circumstances. The professional opportunities that emerge for Peter during this period, including new freelance work and scientific consulting, provide him with purpose and income while also creating new social connections that help fill the void left by the loss of his marriage. The evolution of Spider-Man's crime-fighting activities during this period reflects both his maturity as a hero and his unconscious attempts to fill the emotional emptiness created by Mephisto's deal. His increased dedication to helping others becomes both a source of meaning and a way of avoiding the pain he cannot understand. As Peter adapts to his new circumstances and begins to build a different kind of life, he carries with him the unconscious knowledge that something essential is missing, driving him to seek connection and meaning in ways that honor the love he has lost while also moving forward toward whatever future awaits him. The man who made the ultimate sacrifice to save the woman who raised him must now find ways to live with the consequences of that choice, even as he struggles to understand why his heart feels so heavy and his life so incomplete. The journey that began with a teenage boy gaining spider powers continues into an uncertain future, guided by the same moral principles and sense of responsibility that have defined Peter Parker's character throughout his amazing, spectacular, and ultimately very human story. The web of fate that connects all things continues to spin, carrying our hero toward new adventures, new relationships, and new opportunities to prove that with great power comes great responsibility, no matter what the cost. As our journey through the complete story of Spider-Man draws to a close, we find ourselves contemplating not just the adventures and tragedies of one remarkable individual, but the enduring themes and timeless truths that have made Peter Parker's story resonate with readers across generations and cultures. The boy who was bitten by a radioactive spider has become more than just a character in comic books. He has become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the fundamental belief that ordinary people can choose to do extraordinary things. The web that Spider-Man swings on through the canyons of Manhattan serves as a perfect metaphor for the interconnected nature of all our lives and choices. Each strand represents a relationship, a decision, a moment of triumph or failure that connects to every other aspect of existence. Peter Parker's story teaches us that we are all part of this web, all connected to each other in ways that make our individual choices matter far beyond our personal circumstances. The evolution of Peter Parker from awkward teenager to mature hero reflects the growth and development that we all experience as we navigate the challenges of life. His struggles with responsibility, relationships, and the desire to do good in a complicated world mirror the moral dilemmas that face every person who tries to live according to their principles while also maintaining the human connections that give life meaning. The rogues gallery of villains that Spider-Man has faced over the decades represents not just exotic threats and colorful antagonists, but the dark impulses and destructive forces that exist within all of us and within society as a whole. The Green Goblin's madness, Dr. Octopus's arrogance, Venom's hatred, and the Lizard's tragic transformation all reflect aspects of human nature that Peter must overcome, not just in battle but within himself. The supporting cast of characters who have shared Peter's journey, Aunt May's wisdom, Uncle Ben's moral guidance, Gwen Stacy's innocence, Mary Jane's love, Harry Osborn's friendship, represent the relationships and influences that shape all of our lives. Their stories remind us that heroes are not created in isolation, but are formed through the love, support, and sometimes the loss of the people who care about them. The famous phrase, "with great power comes great responsibility," has transcended its origins in a comic book story to become a guiding principle for anyone who possesses abilities, resources, or opportunities that can be used to help others. Peter Parker's interpretation and application of this principle throughout his heroic career provides a template for how ordinary people can approach the challenge of using whatever power they possess in service of the greater good. The responsibility that Peter accepts is not limited to stopping criminals or preventing disasters, though these activities form the visible core of his heroic mission. His true responsibility extends to being the kind of person who inspires others to believe in the possibility of goodness, courage, and selfless service. Every act of heroism, every moment of compassion, every choice to help rather than to ignore contributes to a legacy that influences countless other people to make similar choices in their own lives. The mistakes that Peter makes throughout his career, the times when he acts from selfish motives, allows his emotions to override his judgment, or fails to save everyone he wants to protect, serve as reminders that heroism is not about perfection but about the willingness to keep trying despite the inevitable failures and setbacks. The true measure of a hero is not whether they never fall but whether they continue to get back up and fight for what is right. The personal costs that Peter pays for his heroic mission, the loss of loved ones, the strain on his relationships, the financial struggles, the constant danger, illustrate the reality that doing the right thing is not always easy or rewarding in conventional terms. His willingness to accept these costs while continuing to choose heroism over comfort demonstrates the kind of moral courage that defines true greatness. The joy and satisfaction that Peter finds in his work as Spider-Man, despite all the difficulties and dangers, reveals the deep truth that using our abilities to help others is one of the most fulfilling ways to live. The moments of triumph, the lives saved, the families reunited, the criminals reformed, these positive outcomes provide meaning and purpose that make the sacrifices worthwhile. What makes Spider-Man's story ultimately so compelling and enduring is not the spectacular action sequences, the exotic villains, or the science fiction elements, but the fundamentally human heart that beats at the center of every adventure. Peter Parker's struggles with identity, relationships, responsibility, and the desire for happiness are challenges that every reader can understand and relate to, regardless of their own circumstances or abilities. The loneliness that Peter often experiences as a result of his secret identity reflects the isolation that many people feel when they believe that others cannot understand their struggles or appreciate their true nature. His gradual discovery of the importance of trust, communication, and vulnerability in maintaining meaningful relationships provides guidance for anyone who has struggled to balance privacy with intimacy. The guilt that drives much of Peter's heroic activity, his belief that he could have prevented Uncle Ben's death, his responsibility for the dangers that his enemies create, his inability to save everyone who needs help, represents a psychological burden that many people carry in different forms. His learning to transform guilt into positive action while also accepting the limitations of his control over events offers hope for anyone who struggles with self-blame and regret. The love that sustains Peter through his darkest moments, his memory of Uncle Ben's wisdom, his affection for Aunt May, his romantic relationships with Betty, Gwen, and Mary Jane, his friendships with Harry and others demonstrates the essential role that human connection plays in maintaining hope and motivation during difficult times. Even the most powerful hero needs people who care about him as a person rather than just as a symbol. The humor that Peter maintains even in the most serious situations, his wisecracks during battle, his ability to find absurdity in tragedy, his refusal to let the darkness of the world extinguish his capacity for joy, serves as a reminder that laughter and lightness are not just coping mechanisms but essential aspects of a healthy approach to life's challenges. As we reach the end of our comprehensive journey through Spider-Man's story, it's important to remember that this is not really an ending but a pause in an ongoing narrative that continues to evolve and develop. Peter Parker's adventures, relationships, and moral growth continue in comics, films, television shows, and other media, each new story adding layers to our understanding of this remarkable character. The beauty of Spider-Man's story lies partly in its openness to new possibilities and interpretations. Different creators have found fresh ways to explore Peter's character, to introduce new challenges and relationships, to examine how his principles apply to changing circumstances and evolving social realities. The core elements that define Spider-Man, his sense of responsibility, his scientific curiosity, his commitment to protecting innocent people, his struggle to balance heroism with personal happiness, remain constant while allowing for creative exploration of new situations and scenarios. The influence that Spider-Man has had on popular culture, on other fictional heroes, and on real people who have been inspired by his example, creates a legacy that extends far beyond the pages of comic books. Teachers, doctors, firefighters, social workers, and countless other people have found in Peter Parker's story a model for how to approach their own responsibilities with courage, compassion, and dedication. The questions that Spider-Man's story raises about power, responsibility, justice, and human nature remain relevant and important regardless of changes in technology, society, or global circumstances. The moral dilemmas that Peter faces, when to intervene and when to step back, how to balance individual needs against collective good, whether the ends justify the means, are dilemmas that every generation must grapple with in their own context. As you drift towards sleep, Let your mind wander through the web of stories we've explored together, from that first fateful spider bite in a high school science class to the mature hero who has faced cosmic threats and personal tragedies with equal courage. Picture Peter Parker swinging through the night sky above New York City, the lights below him representing millions of people who sleep peacefully because someone chooses to watch over them. Think of Aunt May's gentle wisdom, teaching a young boy that helping others is not just a duty but a privilege. Remember Uncle Ben's quiet strength and the simple truth that became the foundation of a hero's life. Feel the love that Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane Watson brought to Peter's world, showing him that even heroes deserve happiness, and that the heart is just as important as the mind in determining how we use our gifts. Consider the friendships that sustained Peter through his darkest moments. Harry Osborn's loyalty despite their complicated history, the respect of fellow heroes who recognized his worth, the gratitude of ordinary people whose lives he touched in ways both great and small. These connections remind us that no one succeeds entirely alone, that we all need others to help us become the best versions of ourselves. Reflect on the enemies that Peter faced and sometimes redeemed, the lizard's tragic transformation showing that good people can lose their way, Dr. Octopus's brilliance corrupted by arrogance, the Green Goblin's madness born from pain and pressure. Even in his villains, Peter often found lessons about compassion, understanding, and the thin line that separates those who help from those who harm. Let the image of Spider-Man's web carry you into peaceful dreams, each strand representing the connections that bind us all together in a community of shared hopes and mutual responsibility. The web reminds us that every action creates ripples that touch other lives, that every choice to help rather than harm makes the world a little brighter, a little safer, a little more filled with hope. In your dreams tonight, swing alongside Spider-Man through the urban canyons of New York, feeling the wind in your face and the city spread out below like a constellation of possibilities. Know that somewhere out there, someone is choosing to use their power, whatever form it takes, in service of others, carrying forward the legacy of responsibility that began with a teenage boy who learned that being a hero is not about the spider bite, but about the choice to get back up every time you fall. The story of Spider-Man is ultimately the story of all of us, ordinary people faced with the choice of how to use whatever abilities we possess, whether great or small. In Peter Parker's journey from selfish teenager to selfless hero, we see reflected our own potential for growth, change, and the kind of heroism that doesn't require superpowers, just the courage to care about others and the determination to act on that caring. Sleep well, true believers, and remember that with great power, the power to choose kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, action over apathy, comes great responsibility. But it's a responsibility that we need not carry alone, for we are all part of the same web, all connected by the simple truth that we are stronger together than apart, and that every act of heroism, no matter how small, makes the whole world a little bit brighter. The amazing, spectacular, and ultimately very human story of Spider-Man continues in the choices we make, the love we share, and the hope we maintain that tomorrow can be better than today. Sweet dreams, and may you always remember that heroes come in all sizes, from all backgrounds, and that the most important superpower of all is the one that beats in every human heart. The power to love, to hope, and to never give up on the possibility that we can make a difference in this web of life we all share. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man story ends here, but the inspiration it provides lives on forever. Rest now, and dream of webs that connect rather than trap, of power used wisely and responsibly, and of the knowledge that even in the darkest night, there's always someone watching over us. Someone who has chosen to be a hero not because they have to be, but because they understand that being a hero is simply what good people do when others need help. With great power comes great responsibility. With great love comes great joy. With great dreams come great possibilities. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the web of heroism connects us all, and that your own story of responsibility and love is just beginning.